Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for your patience, and more importantly, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the fifth annual Elijah Cummings Democracy and Freedom Festival. My name is Eugene Scott. I am a journalist and a visiting fellow at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Agora Institute, and I'll be the MC for today's event. And we want to really show our appreciation for how much we are glad that you've taken this time in this moment to join us. We have so much planned for you today that we think will inspire you, encourage you, and lead you to engage these ideas in this moment and beyond. But before we begin, just a brief note, the views expressed by our speakers are their own and do not necessarily represent those of Johns Hopkins University or the SNF Agora Institute. We also kindly want to ask you to silence your phones at this time. We just want you to know that this event is also being live streamed and recorded, and we don't want any disruptions if possible. Also, we're going to ask you, you all are familiar with this if you've been in school or a movie theater or church, if you can move in, if you have vacancies, open seats on your row, that'll make it easier for people just arriving to get seated without having to crawl over so many folks. Thanks. So in addition to being a visiting fellow, I'm a journalist. I've spent the last 2 decades plus traveling the country, covering politics, policy, and business and how all of these things intersect. Much of my reporting has focused on identity and how it shapes our politics and our personal relationships and stories and really influences the choices we make. We'll talk about that quite a bit in many of our panels. But for now, we want you to make space for democracy today and take these conversation topics with you beyond this campus. We've given you all a nice, delightful toiletry bag. We want you to tuck it in your suitcase as a reminder that democratic ideas know no borders. So carry this conversation with you wherever you go. Turn on the Bluetooth speaker to hear the songs and podcasts that connect us. You can scan the QR code on the bottom to find our SNF Agora channel. We want you to enjoy the Baltimore-made caramels, depending on where you're from, because democracy, like community, it's sweetest when we all have a seat at the table. I know it's a little corny, but it works. So draft a message on the note cards. I hope everyone got one. If you did not, you can certainly get one on your way out. And share your reflections with your friends. Share them with your family, because as anyone who's been even mildly engaged, this is a very important topic right now that is affecting us all. You can give them to an SNF Agora staff member if you want them mailed, if you want to passively aggressively get someone involved in the conversation about democracy without having to initiate it yourself. And so lastly, while we wait for our guests to arrive, we just want to get started on one of the key goals of the Democracy and Freedom Festival, and that's learning about each other, sharing our stories, and making connections. But now we're going to officially kick off this festival with our Dean, Christopher Chalenza, and our Professor, Hari Hahn, who are going to welcome you before and come to the stage right here while you all make room for others to come in. Yes.
Thank you so very much for bringing us all together and for introducing us. And folks, thank you all for being here. My name's Chris Chalenza. I'm the Dean of the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences, and it's been a great privilege and pleasure to watch the Agora Institute grow, and most of all, to see this Democracy and Freedom Festival take wing. Can I ask for raising hands? How many people have been part of this festival before, earlier iterations? Well, this is great. Let's give each other a hand. This is the 5th annual such festival. That's something to celebrate. I want to thank our partners, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, for their partnership and their vision. I want to extend a special welcome, if she's in the room yet, I don't think I see her, but to Dr. Maya Rockamore Cummings, who is around. I know she's here, and if she's not here at the moment, she will be. Because, of course, this festival is named after Elijah Cummings, and we honor that presence and that vision in everything that we do. I think it's worth saying something that is part of how we express ourselves as a university, and that has to do with free expression. I'll quote to you from our own free expression statements. Johns Hopkins is committed to the steadfast protection of free expression. Without full and vigorous protections of this value, our ability to create knowledge and explore ideas would be compromised. It sounds simple, it sounds anodyne, but it has a lot of layers of deep meaning in it, because what it is really a signal to do is not just to express, but to listen. You have to create space, as Eugene Scott said, space in our hearts to hear people, often people who differ very profoundly with us. And so that's part of what democracy is about. I think that one of the things you'll hear a lot about today is that democracy is not a fixed set of institutions. It's not one thing written down on one page. It's a lot more than that. It's action, it's constant thinking, it's constant commitment and recommitment to those ideals. And most importantly, again, democracy is about people. And people don't all think the same things all the time. So the more we can create spaces where we can have room for difference, the more we can really look into the eyes and see a fellow human being of someone who differs from us, the more we're going to have this mission of making the world better for all of us take place. And so now I'm very pleased to get out of your way. I'm going to introduce my good friend and colleague, Professor Hari Hahn. She's the inaugural director of the SNF Agora Institute, the Stavros Niarchos Professor of Political Science, and I would like to add the recent awardee of the 2025 MacArthur Fellowship Genius Award. So Hari, welcome.
Thank you. It's really my pleasure to welcome all of you here today to, excuse me, to the signature program, one of our signature programs at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, Agora Institute. As you all know, we model ourselves on the principles of the ancient Agora, and in ancient Athens, the Agora was it was a marketplace, but it was more than a marketplace, right? It was a place where people came together to learn from each other, to develop the habits and the skills of citizenship. And a lot of what we try to do at the Institute is realize the promise of the ancient Agora in modern times. So try to figure out how we take those principles and make them come alive and animate them in the 21st century. And so that's a lot about what we try to do at the Institute is create spaces where we can learn from each other, learn to engage across difference, as Dean Chalenza said, to engage in the kind of deliberation that makes democracy work. And so we try to do that even when it's tough. And so we live in a moment when protecting the right for free expression is harder than ever, but it's something that we feel like is more vital. And so you might have seen some of the protesters outside, which of course, we really, as a university and as an institute, respect the right for everyone to have that expression. But one of the things we try to think about at the Agora Institute is how do we do that in a way that recognizes our rights as being collective rights, so that it's not that my rights end where your nose starts, right? But that we're all trying to work together in a way that allows each of us to have expression, that in a way that enables everyone else around us to also have that expression. And so today, I don't think Dr. Cummings is here yet, but we just had lunch with her elsewhere. But anyways, it is a real pleasure to be able to be here at the 5th annual Elijah Cummings Democracy and Freedom Festival, because it's our opportunity here at Hopkins and in Baltimore to create the kind of community, connection, curiosity, and collective imagination that we need to animate the ancient Agora in modern times. And so that's what we're going to be doing this afternoon, as Dean Chalenza said. We're going to hear from a wide range of renowned scholars and practitioners, from advocates, and we're going to be guided in a series of conversations through respectful debate and discussion, and we'll learn about cutting-edge research, and hopefully all of you will be able to build relationships that will endure beyond any of the events and the conversations that we have today. So before I turn it over, I just want to extend what is inevitably going to be an incomplete list of thank yous. I first want to thank the entire team at the SNF Agora Institute. I don't think they're actually in the room because they're actually working to put the event on. But Mary Bruce and Young Song in particular, Dave Richelsoff, who is here in the room, in really putting in just so many hours of work to make this event possible. Also want to thank all the partners at the university who've been so helpful in making the whole Agora Day celebration possible. And of course, our partners at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, who've been with us from the very beginning, without whom none of this work would be possible. And Dr. Cummings is walking in right as I say the words, and so really am enormously grateful for your partnership all these years and being able to partner with you on this conference. So let me turn it over. I don't know if I was not here for the very beginning. I don't know if Eugene Scott had a chance to introduce himself, but he's, not only our MC for the day, but he's an award-winning journalist. He's a best-selling author. He's a host at Axios Live, and a most important title of his, of course, is he's an SNF Agora visiting fellow. So we're delighted to have you. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hahn and Dean Chalenza, and congrats again on your MacArthur Fellow Award. Both Professor Hahn and Dean Chalenza spoke on the importance of democracy and how much making space was a priority for the late Congressman Elijah E. Cummings. If those of you all who perhaps are unfamiliar with his work should certainly take some time to look it up. I think 2 days from now is the anniversary of his passing, and we just really want to honor the legacy that he left for us with this festival and the work that he did. His leadership was rooted here in Baltimore, felt across the nation, and reminds us why these gatherings are just so important. So if we could take a brief moment of silence in his memory and for his legacy. Now to open our program, we begin with our first session, Making Space for Connection, with Professor Hari Hahn, John Sarbanes, Timothy Schaefer, and Bianca Newton.
Thank you very much for kicking this off. And the Democracy and Freedom Festival, named for Elijah Cummings, is one of those powerful expressions here in Baltimore, now in its 5th year, of what our democracy really stands for. And I miss Elijah every single day. I am currently at the SNF Agora Institute as a practitioner in residence, thinking about how do you translate the amazing scholarship and research that's going on at SNF Agora out into the community, connect what's the practical application of that. But I had, for 18 years, the privilege of serving in the United States House of Representatives, and I miss Elijah every single day. In fact, speaking about democracy, and Maya will know this, he used to sit in the front row. If you wanted to find Elijah, you could find him in the front row, and the reason he sat in the front row is because he insisted on voting using the card that you write your name on and your district on. We vote typically using an electronic voting card, but he felt that it was really important for him to have that kind of physical expression of his vote and his voice. And so for however many thousand votes he cast, that's the way that he did it. We have an amazing panel here today. And we're going to talk about this idea of making space for connection. What does that mean in a democracy? I want to first of all congratulate Ron Daniels and Andreas Dracopoulos. Ron, of the president of Johns Hopkins, Andreas Dracopoulos, the co-president of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, for the incredible collaboration, this partnership that produced the SNF Agora Institute. We've heard a lot about that today, and we'll hear some more about it today. And I want to congratulate the Institute on launching this very, very powerful festival that they've now had on 5 different occasions. The theme of this panel, as I said, is making space for connection, and we're going to talk about it in terms of physical space for connection. Obviously, this is a physical space where we're coming into contact with one another, face to face, and there's a powerful opportunity presented by that. There's a lot of virtual spaces being created today, but physical spaces, I think, remain the place where we can anchor our ambition for democracy and sort of strengthening that connective tissue that brings us all together. And that's why it's so very, very important. There are at least two different categories of spaces that I want to lead this panel through today. One is space where you intentionally and by design invite people in to have a conversation about difficult issues, to have dialogue, to address democracy, policy, and so forth. In other words, that's the premise of it. You open up the physical space, you extend the invitation because you want people to come and engage in that. And somebody who knows a lot about this space, and the reason I'm using this cheat sheet is this panel is very distinguished, and I want to make sure that I don't miss any of their credentials. Tim Schaefer, who is the inaugural SNF Chair of Civil Discourse and Director of the SNF Ithaca Initiative at the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware, is very practiced in the art of what it means to convene people physically in a space to have a conversation and a dialogue. And we're going to hear from him in a moment about that. Another kind of space is where people are brought together for completely different reasons. So for example, they may be there just because they're carrying on the activities of daily living, daily life. An example of this is the YMCA of Central Maryland. And we have Bianca Newton from the YMCA, again, a long title, Bianca, Assistant Executive Director for Teen Experience and Workforce Development at the YMCA of Central Maryland. And I will confess or declare that I am also associated with the YMCA. I've been on the board, I think, for about 10 years, John. Is that correct? Very powerful institution. So Bianca and I are going to kind of tag team in our observations from the perspective of the Y. But just to kind of put a punctuation mark here, the YMCA is one of the most diverse places you will find anywhere in Baltimore, in the state of Maryland, in the region, I think, in the country. And when I say diverse, I mean religiously, generationally, racially, ethnically, and politically. Now, people are not coming to the YMCA to have a conversation about democracy. They're coming to work out, to swim, to run on the treadmill. But as we will talk about later, that sense of belonging and inclusion they have becomes a tremendous opportunity to then have conversation and test the proposition of more interaction and connection. So the last person who's on this panel, who's been introduced at least 30 times today already, is Hari Hahn. And I'm going to dispense with the cheap applause line of mentioning that she's a MacArthur genius, because we've already heard that a number of times. But Hari is best situated actually to kick this off. And Hari, you undertook a really groundbreaking study in your P3 lab, mapping the modern Agora, to look at civic infrastructure all across the country and to understand the depth of it and also the places where it may be a little bit frayed. And if you could speak to that, I think that's a good place for us to start.
Sure. Well, first, let me just start by thanking Congressman Sarbanes for, he said he's a practitioner in residence. He's actually our distinguished practitioner in residence, and it's been such a pleasure to have you be a part of the community. So thank you for all the ways that you've contributed. But to answer your question, so the Mapping the Modern Agora project, it started from a couple basic ideas, right? The first idea being that the things that we're asking humans to do when we ask them to engage in democracy is actually really hard, right? We're asking them to engage with people who they disagree with, to be in community with people who they're different from, to think about the long term, not the short term, to think about the common good, not just self-interest. And these are all things that, evolutionarily speaking, humans aren't equipped to do. We don't come out of the womb with those skills. And so if that's point one, then the second point is, well, if we don't come out of the womb with those skills, in the same way that we all need to go to the gym to exercise our physical bodies, we need gyms for democracy, right? We need places where we can go and develop the habits and the skills to think about the common good, to think about what it means to engage with people who are different from us, to learn habits of tolerance and all of these different kind of things. And one of the real challenges that we have in American politics, but really in politics around the world, is that those gyms, those democracy gyms, have become hollowed out or emaciated over the past 50 years for a variety of reasons that we can talk about. And so one of the challenges that we tried to think about is, okay, like how can we bring data to trying to understand what the state, in a way, of the modern Agora is, right? Because that's what the Agora was, it's kind of like a gym for democracy. And we were able to partner with data scientists and some of our colleagues here at Johns Hopkins University and essentially harness a lot of the data that's out there now to create a map of civic infrastructure in the United States, to sort of say, where is it that ordinary people have access to lots of places like the YMCA or other kinds of places where they might be able to develop those habits for democracy, and where places where we might see some what we call civic deserts, right, where they don't really have the kind of opportunity, or people aren't invited into opportunities to exercise their democracy muscles. And I think part of what we found is that if you really look at what that landscape of civic infrastructure looks like, then the challenges that we have are really challenges of one, design, and two, distribution. So on the distribution side, it's true that civic opportunity, or the opportunities to engage in those kind of democracy to build those democracy muscles, they're not evenly distributed across the United States, right? And so high-income communities tend to have more access to civic opportunity than low-income communities, for example. Communities with lower rates of immigration also tend to have, more opportunities, and so there's sort of like distribution problems. But then there's also design problems, right? In the same way that not all gyms are the same, right? Not all CrossFit is the same, that like the design of the gym really matters. And so there are some organizations, like the local YMCA in Maryland that are doing extraordinary job bringing lots of different kinds of people together and then putting them into opportunities where they accidentally almost enter into those kinds of relationships. And there are other places where even if that invitation might exist, the actual nature of the experience they're curating for people don't create the same kind of bonds of belonging that you were talking about. And so, for us, like being able to create that map kind of laid the foundation for then asking what are the next questions about design and distribution that we need to answer.
I mean, it's a tremendous undertaking, and it can be a really valuable resource. And I can see where, over time, people are going to draw on that. And so that's one example of how research, scholarship, and so forth that's happening at the Institute with the mind of how do we practically apply that can make a very, very, very powerful difference. Bianca, let's talk about the why a little bit, you and I. And I will just mention that Elijah Cummings, when he was a youngster, learned to swim at the Druid Hill Y. He had a very, very powerful connection to the YMCA, and he would show up at ribbon cuttings and other things to emphasize how important it was. And of course, his understanding of why youth and youth leadership is so critical was as expansive as any I've ever seen. And he would constantly remind people of why we have to let the youth lead us into the future. There's a lot of quotes, and we'll probably get to them about that before the end of this panel. But Bianca, you work with teens at the YMCA. You see the leadership potential that they have. And you also, I think, understand this special sauce, this special feeling that the Y is able to generate for those who participate there. And that creates great opportunity. So maybe you could speak a little bit to that, what you see, what you feel, and in particular, what the opportunity for youth leadership is.
For sure, thank you. So there are so many opportunities for youth leadership at the Y that it is actually way more than the average person knows, right? And so we have youth in government, where we are a part of community schools. We act as the largest lead agency in Baltimore City and are in over 25 community schools in Baltimore City. And so with that, we have community school directors that are intentionally placed into schools where they act as a resource, and they create resource opportunities, and they really help to create a hub within Baltimore City schools. So if students need mental health resources, food access resources, clothing, a variety of things, even if they just want to be linked to something in the community that maybe they don't know about, their community school director's job is to help them and to be a bridge to that, right? And they also help put them back into leadership opportunities within the Y. And so with youth in government, our teens get this rich opportunity to be a part of something that is so rewarding, where they get to write legislation, they get to introduce it, they get to sit in the state house, and it's a really impeccable opportunity that not very many like young adults get. There are many of us who have never been to the state house, right, and actually gotten to sit on the floor and hit those electronic voting buttons, and our kids get to do that. And so it's this wonderful opportunity that if you are a part of a Y school, or if you're not a part of a Y school, but the Y offers this youth in government opportunity, it's one where kids can get exposed to governance and be a part of civic engagement in a way that starts them really early. And it helps them learn what the process looks like, so that way they can participate in it long after they're in their high school ages, right? We also have something called Leaders Club, and Leaders Club sets up our kids with opportunities to present business ideas, to like collaborate with people in different parts of the city, even in different counties, where they get to learn different things, learn from different contributing members. So sometimes there are folks who work at the Y, who are members at the Y, who come in and like just speak truth to power to these students. And it really ignites something in them for them to continue on in leadership pursuits. And it's just really amazing opportunity. And one other that I'll talk about with ways to engage in our space is the New Horizons program. And so a lot of people are familiar with the New Horizons programs. It's one of our signature programs. And many youth who identify as homeless or housing insecure participate in this workforce development program. And it gives them an opportunity across Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Howard County to participate in either a weekend program or a 6 to 8 week program over the summer, where they get coaching experience from professionals, where they are placed in a job either at the Y or somewhere else. And I got an opportunity this year to read the 65 impact statements from the students who participated in the New Horizons program over the summer, and the way that it ignites something in them and shows them that they are valued, that they are cared for, and that they also have a sense of responsibility. It's creating space so that way they see it in themselves, and then they can go out and do something with it, right? And we're really proud of creating spaces that allows that type of engagement with teens and young adults.
So I want to emphasize something here, speaking now with my Y hat on. You talked about these opportunities at the Y for people and young people to learn the skills of democracy and how to practice them and to come into dialogue with one another in a way that's very reinforcing. But they come to that inside this world that the YMCA has built that has this sense of belonging to it. So what's happening there is you're exploring the opportunity for democratic engagement, but you are anchoring it in a culture of belonging and humanity that makes those participants feel safe. And this is what I meant at the beginning about this idea of spaces where people gather for other reasons. They don't show up with a ticket to be punched for a dialogue today. They show up for some other reason. But there's something powerful there that can be tapped and then channeled and translated into democratic engagement. And we need to find those kind of spaces as much as we possibly can. And we need to find this connective tissue out in the country. Before I turn it over to Tim, I'll just make an observation. When I was in Congress, one of my mentors was Steny Hoyer, who was for many years the Democratic Majority Leader. He's still in Congress. He's been there for decades. And Steny told the story of being at a town hall once, and one of the participants sort of came at him and said, frustrated, when are you all going to start getting along in Washington? And Steny came right back at him and said, we'll start getting along when you start getting along. And that was an edgy response, but I think what he was pointing to is that we live in a representative democracy. And if the people send us to institutions like Congress with a mandate to fight rather than work together, then it's going to affect the way the institution operates. What does that mean? That means the solution is to get out into the community, onto the ground, and get citizens and people talking with one another again and building bridges. So when it comes time to send us to those institutions of democracy, they send us with a different set of responsibilities. Tim, you are right at the center of what it looks like, as is Hari. I mean, this is what you all do, of designing spaces for the purpose of having conversation. Speak to that, the challenges that are presented by it, both on campus, where you are in a significant way, and how that compares to sort of off-campus gatherings as well.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Hari, and to the whole team here. Higher education is one of these, I mean, we're sitting in it right now, right? Isn't this a wonderful space to be? I'm looking out at the group and like, what a mix of people. We've got undergrads, grads, people who look definitely like seniors of some sort. That's all right. No, but this is it. Like, I have 4 kids. They all swim at the Y close to us, not in Delaware, Cecil County. We crossed the border because Delaware is a small place. But the other night I was picking them up. We have a transfer because we have 4 kids, 3 different times. It's a mess. We got baseball. Don't ask me about how it works. But one of the beautiful things is, and I was just thinking about it as you were saying this a moment ago, I was picking up my 6-year-old who's learned, she finally got the green band on her arm to not require like a parent to swim, which my wife is so happy about. But right beside him is this sort of like jazzercise, like in the water aerobics group, and they're like literally feet from each other, right? And it's such a beautiful thing, the mix of folks that show up in these spaces, and none of them are saying democracy, but they're living it and practicing it and figuring out how to not just coexist, but how to be in spaces together. So for me, I focus on higher education. And in 2 days, right now is not an opportune time to be anywhere other than back at the University of Delaware, but in 2 days, we are inviting 150 students from around the country to the SNF Ithaca National Student Dialogue. This is our 5th, so apparently 5 is the number for the day. But we have students from all over the country, every institutional type, aside from tribal colleges. We've been trying, we have more work to do. But we have students from every geographical area, different kind of universities, small, big, historically black, community colleges. And they'll spend a couple days talking about civil discourse. What does this mean? What does it look like? How's it playing out on your campus? And how do you go back? Some practical tools of like, how are you going to try to address some of this? And we've had some wonderful moments where students have come back and shared with us, and some of their faculty too, of, we had some ideas, actually some folks at Penn, I think if I can just point to you all for a second. A few years ago, you had some students who said, we really want to reimagine our orientation. And you had already been kicking that idea around a little bit, I think, but that sort of jumped it, kind of gave a jump start, and there it is. Students have created things that don't require a lot of resources. So when you talk about the built environment, there's something beautiful about this space, but there's also something about the built environment that can predetermine what's going to happen. We're sitting up here, you're there, and our interactions are different, right? And so sometimes we need to reimagine the opportunities and the spaces that we have. Colleges and universities are great venues for these sorts of moments to occur, right? Classrooms are great. The dining halls, the libraries, the greens, right? All these sort of spaces. But one of the big challenges is we have defaults. And what you were just saying about the comment about Congress, right? The dysfunction. We step into so many spaces and think about, how am I supposed to be here? And one of the biggest things that I have a challenge, actually one of my co-teachers is back there. We're teaching a course this semester called Citizens, Civility, and Change. And I had a whole moment yesterday. I get really animated. We're using Peter Levine's book, What Should We Do? And I'm like, you're going to hear me say this for the rest of your life, so get ready. What should we do? Because it's not simply dialogue. It's about, how do we act together? How do we think about collective issues and challenges? But they're so accustomed, their default setting is, what's the right answer? What do I need to say right now to get this grade? I hate grading. I don't know how you feel about grading, but one of my classes I've given up. I'm like, you're going to grade yourself. We're going to talk about it at the end. It's wonderful. But I'll tell you all about that later if you want. But it works. It works. I've used it for years, almost a decade, and I've changed grades 3 times. Students have a degree of self-assessment of like, I wish I would have had that, but I don't deserve that. And I'm like, I think that's right. And other times, it's always the women who are like, I could have done more. I was like, you are an A+, you are not a C. So that's another lesson there too. But when we think about the opportunities and the spaces that we have, what a gift. When we think about democracy's challenges, all the laments that we might have, what is in so many communities? It's the Ys, it's the public libraries, one of the few places you don't have to pay to go into or buy a drink and feel like, I've been sitting in this chair for too long. Sit in that library for hours. They'll probably bring something to you. But universities, colleges are all over. There are community colleges. There are places like Johns Hopkins, University of Delaware, and so many others. You've experienced this too, right? There are these places, these are hubs for democracy. If we can reimagine, I think sometimes those limitations that are built in, that default setting, that for so many of us, and not just college students, but for all of us, how do we step into spaces? How do we imagine something else? This idea of creating space for democracy is at the heart, I think, of what, particularly in higher ed, like we need to wrestle with. How does that intersect with the disciplines and the questions, the big things you're trying to figure out, but how does that play out? So anyway, I went a little bit long.
Yeah,
but
very powerfully said. A few moments ago, the SNF Agora Institute's new building across the street was opened up. And the theme at that moment was this idea of creating space, all different kinds of spaces that people can tap into for engagement, for connection, which then leads to these very, very important conversations that we need to have. There will be spaces in that building for people to sit by themselves and reflect. There will be spaces where they can get together just sort of to talk, have coffee. And there will be spaces designed to gather people together for a very particular purpose. The other thing about the new building is it is designed in a sense to be a gateway out into the community. So when you think about the SNF Agora Institute and the aspiration it has to both have powerful research and scholarship, but also to figure out what the practical application of that is to society and for the benefit of society and the benefit of our democracy, particularly in this moment. You're talking about a design of the building that caters very much to that particular goal. I did want to mention again on the YMCA of Central Maryland, because I want to emphasize this idea that you can create spaces of belonging and inclusion that you can then tap and harness for the purpose of conversation. The Y has been doing surveys over the last few years, and what has come back is very, very powerful in terms of what the members of the Y feel. There's 120,000 members of the Y of Central Maryland. There's 2,000 employees who show up every day at 12 family centers across this region. The highest marks on a scale of 1 to 5 that the members of the Y give are to feeling comfortable being oneself at the Y, that the Y reflects the community's diversity. So in other words, people show up and they feel like, I am an extension of the community's diversity. A feeling of belonging and inclusion and well-being at the Y. So this notion of a safe space is very, very powerful. And I think all of us in this room can sort of imagine spaces now that make us feel safe, that make us feel connected, and where, frankly, introducing the idea of next level conversation that can make our democracy stronger can really be powerful. But we also have to be careful about that, because you don't want to go upset that secret sauce of what makes that space work. And I'm going to ask Bianca, you and maybe Hari to speak to this, because I'm sure you want to be careful at the Y that you don't sort of, upset the apple cart by going into a group that's just feeling good together and saying it's time to have a conversation about things. It's about leading them there. Hari, you've seen how it can be challenging, and one has to tread carefully. Your book, Undivided, looked at a space where people with diverse backgrounds come together for one reason, faith, and then get invited into a conversation around political issues. So maybe speak, Bianca, to just how we have to be careful about that in a place like the Y, and then Hari, maybe you could speak to your experience there.
Sure. So I think that's an interesting question, and I think when we're talking about being like careful about, you know, disrupting certain spaces that people feel like are their safe spaces, I think a large part of the answer to that is listening to the people who are inhabiting that space, right? And so the Y largely looks like the community that it is in. So if you go to a Y, you're gonna see the people who live around that Y in that Y. If you are a part of a community, there are going to be events that happen at the Y that might be attended by people who are not necessarily members of the Y, but maybe they inquired about using one of our multi-purpose spaces, right? And so I feel like at the Y, there's a really large focus on listening to the people who are a part of the organization, if that is the associates, if that is the people who go and participate in what the offerings are, the many offerings that the Y has. It's a part of being respectful to the space that we're in and not coming from a place of like we know what's best to put into those areas, but more so asking the question of, is this needed? How do we continue to uphold how this space is being used? How do we continue to create spaces that people want to come into? How do we continue to make it where it feels like everyone is welcome here? And if it starts to feel a different way, how do we address those things so that way we are not disrupting the balance of having a Y that looks like the community that it's in?
Yeah, so I think the project that John was mentioning was a project that I just did looking at a group of people that were organizing around issues of racial justice within the third largest evangelical megachurch in America. And so it's a white dominant church that is located outside Cincinnati, Ohio. And it wasn't, I sort of studied it through like 2023, but now it's a 50,000 person church, meaning they get 50,000 people per week to show up in person and about 500,000 people to tune in online. So it's got this enormous scale. It's white dominant, about 80% white, 20% non-white. And they had started this program around racial justice in 2015 that was started by one of the most popular preachers in the church, who is a black pastor who had grown up in the black church. And to the question that you were asking, one of the mottos that they have in the church that really pervaded this program is, that I think is really relevant to our conversation, is this idea that belonging comes before belief. And so the motto of the church is like, look, we're really clear about what we stand for. Like, we're an evangelical church. We believe in a Christian God. There's a whole set of things that come with that. But no matter what you believe or who you are, you're welcome in our community, right? Whether you believe in our God, a different God, no God, it doesn't matter. Like, we welcome you into our community. And they had this ethos of radical welcome that was not dissimilar to what you're describing, in the sense that they didn't want anyone to stand around in the lobby feeling awkward. They didn't want anyone to feel uninvited or disconnected from other people. And so they put a lot of attention into thinking about, how do you make a church that's as large as 50,000 people feel intimate for all the people who are a part of it. And the idea there was that this idea of belonging comes before belief it actually encapsulates like probably 4 decades of social science research in 4 words, which it takes most, people like Tim and me, tens of thousands of boring words filled in peer-reviewed journals to say. But the idea is that like when people feel like they are connected to each other and in a community of belonging, then they become more open to changing their ideas. So that openness to kind of rethinking what I believe is grounded in a relationship where I feel like I can have an authentic exchange with someone who might disagree with me. And so one of the things that people have asked me a lot when I've talked about the book is, do you think that what you saw there is possible outside of the church? And I think that the implicit in the question is the idea that because people were united in a faith community, that's what made this possible. But I actually think that's not what made it possible. It's the idea that in a church community, particularly in an evangelical community, they believe in the inherent ability of people to transform themselves, right? Like that's the idea. I mean, even in evangelicalism, like the idea of being born again is kind of at the heart of the idea. But I think any faith community kind of has this idea that like, as I develop my faith and I develop as a human, and that is really crucial, I think, to this question of how we engage with each other in these kind of democratic deliberative spaces. Do we believe that people are fixed in their ideas, right? Or do we believe that we are all works in progress, right? And the relationships that we form are going to constantly shape and make and remake who we are in the world. And I think that is what we need to kind of think about as we design, whether it's a Y or it's a more explicitly political space, is how do we create the community of belonging and create conditions that enable people to allow themselves to be transformed and to believe in the transformability of others.
So I think I'm down to 1 minute. I know I'm down to 1 minute because I just got the hook over there thrown at me. Tim, I was going to ask you a question, open-ended, but I'll make it close-ended here,
Yeah, give me a point here.
Yeah. I assume that you are every day trying to wrestle with how to balance spaces that are created online for conversation around democratic engagement and so forth, and creating those spaces physically, like the one we're in today. Am I correct in that?
Sorta.
Okay.
Yeah.
He made it open-ended.
Well, I mean, yes, but I mean, I'll take that. Like, I think this is one of the fundamental questions we have to wrestle with right now. Where and how do we show up with each other? There's a beautiful thing. We all have these little miniature computers in our pockets. It's amazing. It's amazing. Our brains were not designed for any of this. We have, I yell at, we sit every night and eat dinner. Wife, 4 kids, that's our routine. And it's a beautiful routine. And when I think about it, of like what's so important is just showing up every day and doing that for the good, the bad, for whatever reason. But one of the challenges is we have a Google and an Alexa that sit on the table in the dining room, and I yell question. There's a question that comes up, and I always immediately, I'm like, hey Google, and I try to ask it, and my wife is like, stop. Technology is pervasive in our lives. It's a great resource, but to what end? I think there's a beauty, and I think we're remembering, especially post-COVID, how important it is to be with people, how important it is to be able to touch, right? Being at a place like the Y reminds you of that. Here you are, you're moving your body, right? You're learning to swim. Good job, little kid, right? It's great, it's beautiful. And for us, especially those of us who work with young people, their formative moments were shaped by looking at a screen, just like we were. Oh my gosh, what a moment. We were trying to figure out how to teach classes on a Zoom screen or something comparable. So as we think about what does it mean to build community, what does it mean to have relationship, to be open to those moments of change, it requires us to be open to other people. And sometimes that can work digitally. It's a beautiful thing. I live far away from my family, and that's the way I get to interact. But if we can be together, if we can create space together and relationships together, maybe that's what democracy needs.
Sounds pretty good to me. I want to close out where we began with Elijah. As anyone in this room knows, when Freddie Gray died almost 10 years ago in police custody, it set off a number of violent protests across the city. I will say that fairly quickly Baltimore found its way to a conversation and dialogue about that was pretty inspirational. And I think Baltimore has something special within it that is something, frankly, the SNF Agora Institute can tap into when it comes to community conversation. But Elijah was asked to give the eulogy, as Maya knows well, at Freddie Gray's funeral. And he said to the thousands that were gathered, you've all come here today to be with Freddie Gray after his passing. But the question is, did you see him when he was alive? And what he meant was, did you see him as a human being? Did you connect with him at a human level? And I think what we're talking about here today is any conversation about community, about civic engagement, about democracy has to be anchored fully in humanity. And that's been a constant theme over the course of the day. When you're engaging with someone, you need to see them, you need to hear them, you need to respect them. And if you do that, then you can embark on a conversation about democracy and strengthening what that means in the broad society. That's the powerful opportunity that is presented to us all, to everyone in this room. And I think it's the opportunity, I know it is, that the SNF Agora Institute is going to be able to facilitate going forward. So thank you all on the panel, and thank all of you for being here to listen.
Thank you all so much for reminding us of the importance of getting away from our phones and into third spaces to connect with one another. We're going to move right into the next session, which is a reminder that every democracy begins with a story. So up next, we're going to have Laura Wexler come share with us who we are, our authentic experiences, and one of the most powerful tools we have to build empathy and understanding. Please welcome Laura.
So I'm one of the founders of the Stoop storytelling series here in Baltimore, and we have a time limit for storytellers, and we ring a little bell when their time is up. So just do that, metaphorically. Yes. So if you're not familiar with the Stoop storytelling series, we're an organization that empowers individuals and builds community through the sharing of personal stories, of first-person stories. And since our founding nearly 20 years ago, I have coached 5,000, probably that's a good estimate, 5,000 people to share their first-person stories on stage. And it has been an absolute privilege and an absolute gift to do it. Again and again, I've seen the power of first-person stories to transform strangers into people who are familiar to each other. One of the most profound examples of this for me was several years ago, I had given a storytelling workshop. So that's a lot of what I do now, is train people to share their personal stories. So I had given a storytelling workshop for a group of men who had been victims of violence, and they were meeting as part of a program through shock trauma. And so we were sitting around the table, and the men were sharing their stories, and one of the men talked about how he had come to be treated at shock trauma, which was that he attempted to commit suicide by cop. So he had a fake weapon that he threatened officers with, and he was shot and seriously wounded as a result. And he said, as part of his story, that he always thought about the officer who shot him, and that he felt a lot of guilt that he had put the officer in that position. And that was extraordinary to me. I never thought about that. And he knew the officer's name because they had been in court together. But of course, in court, you can't talk, it's oppositional, right? You can't tell, I was going to say you can't tell the truth, but that's maybe a bit extreme, but maybe not. Anyway, it's not a place where you can speak, you can be vulnerable, let's put it that way. So he knew this officer's name, and I asked him if he would mind if I tried to find the officer, because I thought the officer would be interested in knowing this, or just, I don't know, I just wanted to find him. At the time I was working for a restorative justice organization as a volunteer, and we were able to locate the officer. And so a week or so later, we brought the two men together in a library, and they shared their stories with each other. These were two men who couldn't have been more different. The officer was a white guy from, I don't know, he had a thick Baltimore accent. He was retired now. And the other young man was a young black man. And he started by sharing his story and saying that he wanted to apologize for putting the officer in this position. And the officer said, I have thought about you so much. I've been worried that you've been okay. The time that I shot you was the only time in my entire career that I fired my service weapon. And I have felt so guilty about it. And so here were these two people whose lives had intersected and had been complete strangers to each other, though they had shared the most intimate act, right? Shooting and receiving a bullet. But bringing them together, they became familiar by sharing their emotions, right? He felt guilty. He felt guilty. They were worried about each other, and they hugged, and I know this sounds Hallmark, but it's true. They recognized each other at the soul level. And I think that, to pick up on some of the themes that were mentioned in the panel of connection and a space where people can find commonality even among difference. I think that is one of the true powers of first-person storytelling, that it is an empathy building machine, really. And it may not be, we may not be born as Hillary said, with all the skills to be good civic participants in democracy, but we are kind of born wired for story. It is very natural for us. And so if we can make spaces or even just find ways to share personal stories with each other, we can become familiar to each other. We can build connections. We can bridge these divides that seem so impermeable otherwise. And that's what we try to do at our shows. And we bring, hundreds, we've had thousands of people who've just come into a room because they're curious and they want to feel something. They're not signing up for, a lecture on democracy, or they're not signing up to have their opinions challenged or to hear about an issue. They're coming to feel. They're coming to feel something. They don't know what they're going to feel. They're going to feel a lot at a Stoop show, but they're coming to feel. And when storytellers can be authentic and open about what they're feeling, that's where the powerful connection is made. And truly, if I know I'm about running out of time, but I just wanted to say you have these storytelling prompts here that you could think about. Maybe if you're meeting people, sharing a personal story is pretty much the opposite of small talk. It just gets right to all the good stuff inside. And if you're thinking about, I don't know how to tell a story, or what should I do? The best stories really answer three questions. What happened? What did it feel like? What did it mean, or what does it mean to you? That's what a story does. It just beautifully answers all those questions by inviting listeners into a kind of story world. I like to think of it like a little snow globe. And you're taking someone by the hand and you're saying, come, this is my experience. This is what happened. This is how it felt. This is what it means to me. And especially that second question, that what did it feel like? That's the emotional question. That's where the powerful relationship and connection is going to be forged. And what we know, I'll just drop a little science on you before I leave, but what we know from research, neuroscience research and fMRI brain imaging, when people are sharing story together, their brains are actually synced. It's called neural coupling. And it's thought that there's no other form of communication that does that. So it puts people in the same emotional state of mind a story does, if they're engaged in it. And there's all these great studies where they've imaged people's brains before they've listened to a story, and they've imaged a storyteller's brains, and then afterward, everybody's brains look the same. They're all synced. And this is without drugs or like any kind of illicit weaponry or anything. It's really powerful. And we know that stories can be used for ill. And I think it's incumbent upon those that don't want to use them for ill to take advantage of this powerful, powerful tool to build these bridges between people that would share nothing. Because if people can share a personal story in which they're open about their feelings, there will be familiarity, there will be recognition. So I just really encourage that. And finally, I just want to say thank you to everybody. This is really inspiring. And I also want to give a shout out to the Waverly Farmers Market as a great public space where things happen. In my other life, I sell flowers at the farmers market, and I didn't realize why I loved it so much until hearing y'all talk, but yeah, it's like the YMCA for me. So thank you very much. If you're interested, we have a podcast, we have shows. You can visit us at stoopstorytelling.com, and there's these prompt cards, so I hope you have some fun sharing stories.
Thank you, Laura. That was awesome. So we're going to transition into our break. We're just going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to allow you all to go neural couple with one another and sync your brains while you grab refreshments. I know the introverts are struggling, but Laura gave you some prompts, so that should help you. So let's just take a break, go outside, get some refreshments, and I'll see you in about 15 minutes. All right, we're going to start in about 60 seconds. Hopefully you were able to use some of your prompts to connect with new attendees while partaking in some of our refreshments. Making space for community is what we were able to do. But once you're in community, the question becomes, how do you have conversations? These are not always easy to start. People don't always know how to start them. And so now we're going to have some folks talk to us, give us some pointers about how do you have dialogue, including disagreement in an ideologically diverse world, which I think is incredibly relevant right now, especially as we head into the holidays and those awkward Thanksgiving dinners. So hopefully you can tell your cousin or your uncle, well, I was at the Democracy and Freedom Festival and I learned blah, blah, blah. But some of the folks who are going to help us with that are going to come up to the front, our platform first. We're going to have Isaac Saw, Nicholas Ma, and Leah Wright-Ruger. And if you all can put the mics as close to your mouths as possible so the live stream folks can hear us better.
Okay.
Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3. All right. So thank you, Eugene, for that introduction, and welcome everyone back to, I think, the second half of the Elijah Cummings Democracy and Freedom Festival. And thank you all for being here today. It's quite the auspicious day. We have a lot going on, and it is wonderful to see everyone's smiling faces right now. I want to take a moment first to introduce myself. My name is Leah Wright-Reger. I am the SNF Agora Institute Associate Professor of History here at Johns Hopkins University. I also work for CNN as a political analyst and presidential historian. And it is my pleasure today to have a conversation about dialogue. And just before I turn over the conversation to our really wonderful speakers today, I want to do just a quick survey. I think this is especially important given the kind of, I think, tension that many of us have been feeling in this nation, not just for the last year, but really for the last 5 years, really since the onset of the pandemic in 2020. So just a quick show of hands. Raise your hand if you've had a conversation this year that felt really hard or difficult to have. Okay, that's what I figured. I knew I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't alone in this. Part of what we are trying to do here today and what we're doing this afternoon is really thinking about how do we have those hard conversations? How do we have these moments of connection where we're reminded of each other's humanity and personhood, of the connections and the networks that we have between each other as fellow citizens and human beings? We're really thinking about how we can agree and disagree deeply while still finding belonging. And I think these are questions that many of us have thought about. It's been in the back of our mind, it's been in the front of our mind, particularly given the state of the nation and the state of the world. These are not easy conversations to have. To Eugene's point, Thanksgiving is coming up. But they're conversations that we need to have. And thinking about both the theoretical and I think the practical applications of how to have difficult conversations and how to have dialogue across difference is one that everyone in this room can benefit from. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our two speakers. And I'll start with Isaac Saul. Isaac Saul is a journalist, political commentator, and founder of Tangle, an independent, nonpartisan news outlet. Isaac founded Tangle in 2019 as an independent outlet dedicated to bridging the partisan divide by offering a trustworthy news source for people of all political backgrounds. Since then, he's grown Tangle into one of the most trusted brands in media, featuring original reporting, balanced commentary, and our deep dives on the animating issues of the day. Outside of Tangle, his work has appeared in publications including CNN, The Free Press, The Huffington Post, Time Magazine, Forward Magazine, and the Independent Journal Review. Next, we have Nicholas Ma. Nicholas Ma is an award-winning director and writer and producer based in Brooklyn, New York, whose film work spans an eclectic array of topics, including botany to basketball. Won't You Be My Neighbor? On the Life of Fred Rogers, a really wonderful movie. Most recently, he wrote and directed Mabel and directed Leap of Faith. His films have premiered at Sundance, the New York Film Festival, and Tribeca. He is also the founder and principal of Ernest Lyford, a boutique consulting firm that unites the creative and the strategic to transform the way that we see the world. So I'd like to start off a little bit with our speakers, and I'm going to start off with asking our speaker a couple of different questions about creating space. And I'm going to start off with Isaac. Now, just a little bit of a preview here. One of the things that I have found that has been really most effective about creating dialogue and being able to have difficult conversations is creating spaces where people can feel safe to express themselves, but also safe to connect across their difference. Right? So whether that's in the classroom, whether that's in a church, in a congregation, whether that might be in a mosque, whether it's on a basketball court, there is a lot of work that I think that goes into creating spaces where people can feel safe to have disagreements and dialogue. So I'm wondering, Isaac, if you can start us off by thinking about maybe a moment where dialogue changed your perspective or someone else, and how that relates to this idea of space.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. Also, I have to tell like a quick 30-second story, because I was here for the first session, which we talked a lot about the Y. I had the most miraculous experience at the Y this morning in Philadelphia. Sorry, not down here. I went and I was trying to get a workout in before I started my day. Some guy walked into the basketball court where I was shooting around and asked him to play one-on-one with me, and we played for about 30 minutes. At the end, we're all sweaty and pissed off. I won, just for the record. And I asked him, I said like, yeah, I got to run. He wanted to play one more game. I said, I had to run. I get to work. And he said, yeah, I got to go too. I have this court date up near City Hall. And I was like, oh, really? My wife's like a public defender. What's going on? And we started talking, and he told me this, incredibly moving story about how he had basically been stuck in the system for 3 years for some charge he got when he was 20, and now he was 23, and he just like really wanted to get this behind him, but the case was still open. And he was like, came to the gym to shoot around and was thinking about bailing on the court case. And we talked for like 45 minutes, and I ended up sort of saying like, you should go. And my wife tells me this like the number one way people end up in jail is trying to skip court cases. And it was just like an incredible example of like, I'm like a middle class white journalist, and this conversation like falls in my lap that was so informative for writing and stuff I do about crime and inner city issues and all this stuff. And it happened at the Y, which I thought was amazing to then sit down and listen to you guys talk about. It's like unbelievable meeting place. So that's a space, one. Really, really, really incredible space. Yeah, I love the Y. I created Tangle to bring people together of different political persuasions. And we've done that, which I'm really proud about, by advertising ourselves to both conservatives and liberals as a place where they can get trustworthy news. And so, there are all kinds of stories about how my views have changed because of things that readers have written into me or spaces I've shared with them. But I actually would go to an instance where I changed a lot of readers' minds that I'm really proud of, which was after the 2020 election. A lot of my Trump-supporting readers believed that the election was stolen. And many of them actually were convinced by my writing about the issue that the election wasn't stolen. And the way that I compelled them to that view was not by writing things like, this unbelievable conspiracy theory and these guys are idiots and whatever. It was by leveling with them, like saying, I'm a journalist. If the 2020 election was stolen, this would be the biggest, best, most incredible story of all time, and I would win many, many awards for proving it. And I tried really hard to figure out whether the 2020 election was stolen. I can assure you it wasn't, and here are all the reasons why. And also saying, like, I understand why you might think the thing that you think, because there's a lot of weird stuff about election laws and how ballots are counted that's sort of a black box, and it's hard to understand, and it's easy to manipulate. And many of them were just like, thanks for not saying I'm an idiot. Thank you for just like talking to me like I'm a smart person who's not a conspiracy theorist. And I think like for us, what we've learned is just representing people's real views, saying their views back to them, making sure you understand what their belief is, and then talking about that rather than kind of strawmanning their views and making them sound stupid and conspiratorial. Is like by far the most effective way to get through to people and have productive conversations. And it's more important than ever in the political space right now, for sure.
It's interesting you talk about space, and the word that comes to my mind is time. And I think you were talking about it a little bit just there. I don't know if in those difficult conversations you've had, how often the thought has gone through your head, I do not have time to explain to you why you are wrong. I do not have the time. I'd have to go way too far back and talk you through too many things, and you're going to argue with me every step of the way, and I do not have the time for that. And I think that we have this terrible illusion where there is an urgency of social justice, whatever that means to us, and there is a slow pace of social change, and that feels intolerable, that gap. And that gap then makes us the least good version of ourselves, right? Because we don't offer time, and it creates this sort of cycle of tension. So I made a movie over the course of 5 years, so clearly I'm an advocate of time. Not only that, it was about 12 pastors talking to each other. They are huge advocates of time. They speak in, saying yesterday, they don't just speak in sentences or paragraphs, they speak in like chapters, and it's a lot. It's a lot. But what I discovered over the course of a year, over the course of 300 hours of footage, was how time makes the impossible possible, right? And if we truly care about change, we have to give of our time in that way. And giving of our time in that way can be doing the analysis to say, I'm going to take your view seriously, or just listening. But you have to give of your time, even if in your mind it feels impossible. But that is the gift that everyone knows the value of, and they can feel it when you do it.
So one of the things that I've been talking with my students about, I've talked with people outside of the classroom about this too, is a concept that Ella Baker, the civil rights advocate, called spade work, which is this idea that you need to take time and learn the lay of the land, learn the people, everyone from the preacher on the pulpit to the pimp down at the house, right? You have to know everyone, but you also have to be willing to put in the work to talk to everyone. And so I'm wondering, I think, Nicholas, I was immediately struck by you saying, like, you have to devote the time and find the time. And then Isaac, your point about finding the space. And so I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit more about the practical components of that, right? Like, what does that actually look like in the work that you're doing around documentary film, or the consulting that you may do, and the journalism that you may do? And sure, you guys have given a couple of different examples, but I'm wondering if you can talk about other instances where you have made room to get to know the people that you are interested in reaching or interacting with.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would say one of the earliest things that happened to me after we started Tangle was I started getting used to people writing into our inbox very angrily because we were covering U.S. politics. This was 2019. It was the lead up to the 2020 election, which feels like decades ago now, but was quite divisive. And every time we wrote something, even when we're doing what we're doing, which is a neutral breakdown of the story, publishing arguments from the left and arguments from the right, and then I share my take in every newsletter, a little mini editorial and a piece of analysis. We're always pissing people off, and they would write in really mad, and I would respond. In the early days, I responded to every email we got until our mailing list was about 30 or 40,000 people. It just got too much. And the number one response that I would get when I replied to somebody was like, "Oh shit, I'm sorry, I didn't think you were gonna read this." Literally, they're just pissed off, and they're used to screaming into the void. They're used to commenting on Facebook. They're used to, yelling at their TV. And then they have a real person saying back to them what they said, being like, "Hey, I read this, kind of hurt my feelings a little bit. Here are some thoughts about what you said." And they just want to be heard. And that was really instructive for me, that that time was worth it. And the number one thing that the number one way it benefited us from a business perspective was replying to people who were writing in to let us know they were canceling their subscription because of something we said or wrote. And we would answer them and, just address their argument, whatever. And, I told my team as we grew and I hired people to help me start answering these emails that 60% of the time we will save that subscriber. And it's true. And it's still true to this day, where if you just answer and say, "Hey, I understand your perspective. Here's why we wrote it the way we did. Here's how I came to the conclusion I came to," the majority of those people will write back and say, "Thanks for answering. It's incredible you did this. I can't believe you're actually replying to me. And I want you to know I just turned my subscription back on." It happens all the time. So, I think a lot of people just want to be heard. They want to be seen. They're not used to being heard or being seen. And I think investing that kind of time is often really worth it. It's definitely been worth it for me.
I couldn't agree more. To convince a bunch of pastors to be on camera pretty much nonstop whenever they were together, that's a tall order. And the only way to do that is to spend time so that you can get to know each other. So we had a year before we started filming of just getting to know each other and trying to say, okay, do we know each other well enough to trust our stories in each other's hands? Do we know each other well enough? Do we trust each other enough? I think the other challenge on this time piece is when we think that the problem is all ours to solve, right? And we think, I can't answer your question because I've got bigger fish to fry, and this is so important that what you're talking about isn't important enough. And I think what I find beautiful about rooms like this, about traveling around with films and being in in cinemas with people like all of y'all, is there are many more people that are biting off their piece of the problem than we can see from where we are. And we have to believe that. We have to have faith that that's true in order to say, okay, I'm going to do the thing that I do really well and give it the time that it needs, because I don't have to do all of it, right? Like Tangle is amazing. Tangle can't do everything. I make movies. My movies aren't seen by everyone. That's okay. If you go in and say this movie will be a failure unless 100 million people see it and 80% of them change their views on politics, it becomes impossible to listen to anyone because you're constantly, editing it down. But if you sort of say, okay, my goal is to truthfully tell this story and to believe that however it ripples out into the world, it will make a difference that I may not be able to control, but could be far greater than I could possibly imagine. That to me is what's so beautiful. And I think if we can give ourselves that permission to say that we are the stewards of our time and not necessarily the stewards of every problem we collectively face, I think we might find that some of those problems dissolve more quickly.
So I do want to let the audience know we do have a couple minutes at the end of this conversation for questions. So please think about what you would like to ask our speakers. But before we jump into that, I'd love to ask one more question, and then I actually lied. I'm contradicting myself right now. But towards the end, once we finish with the questions, I'll have one more question for our speaker. So I want to give you guys a heads up to think about that. So
Got it.
Everyone be on alert. Everyone in this room just be on alert. So just before we open it up to audience questions, I'm wondering if you guys can quickly maybe talk about the idea of empathy and the idea of creating empathy without forcing agreement, right? So part of, I think, what makes the work that you each do individually so special is that you're not out here, trying to bludgeon people with your ideas or indoctrinate or do things like that, but instead you're allowing your work to speak for yourself, or the work to speak for itself. And I think that it appears that empathy is a really big part of that. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that.
Sure, yeah. Empathy is actually like a core value that we talk about in our business internally. I'm fond of saying that politics are personal. Most people's personal experiences are going to inform the way they view the world more than, a report or a study from some major institute or university. I'm sorry to say that in this room, but it's just true. My dad is sort of like semi-retired, lives around the poverty line, drives Uber to make ends meet, basically survives off a Social Security check. My understanding of his world informs the way that I feel about policies that are really relevant to him. He's my dad. I love him dearly. I care about what happens to him. So you're going to have a hard time convincing me about the upside of a Social Security cut, because I know what it would mean for him and how quickly he could sort of fall off into the deep end. Most people have experiences that, inform their politics and allow them to grab on to the studies that they like, or the news articles they like, or the opinions that they like. So, one of the most classic examples, I think, in US politics today is there's a really strong correlation between things like Islamophobia and whether you know a Muslim or not. That's not a coincidence. A lot of people who hold Islamophobic views have never actually shared space or spent time with a Muslim person. And when they do, they realize, oh, they're just kind of normal people like me, and we share a bunch of the same values, and we care about our kids and the country and whatever. And they live out that expression in their politics, the way that they vote, the way that they argue, how they see news stories. So whenever I'm approaching somebody, I think the empathetic thing to do is to consider that the majority of their political worldview is probably built on a foundation of personal experiences that they've had, And it's okay to say like those personal experiences are valid and real, even if they inform views that I think are ugly or dangerous. And I can sort of try and bridge the gap between their experiences and my experiences, and why I think maybe what's happened to them is not the norm and they should have a little bit of a different perspective. But if I just like pretend those experiences don't exist and try and, you know, hit them with all the facts and studies and percentages, I'm never ever gonna make any progress. And I think that is like a very empathetic way to approach politics. And the last thing I'll say is just like, it is, I think like one thing a lot of people love to do who consider themselves empathetic is be really empathetic towards people who like they have value alignment with. The hard thing about being empathetic is like having empathy for people that you hate, frankly, and like people whose worldview that you hate. So I try really hard to do that in my work. Like when I feel my anger, emotion going up, just being like, how would I treat this person if we were kind of values aligned? How would I think about what they're saying? And that helps my approach a lot personally.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if it's always empathy. If someone looks different or has different identitarian markers, but you share all the same values, I'm not sure that that's necessarily empathy. I think that that is actually agreement. And I think that it's much harder to acknowledge those places where things are truly different and know what to do in those moments. I think not everyone is called to every space, but all of us have different difficult relationships in our lives. And by staying present in them, we inherently change the situation. And that doesn't mean by staying present in them, we have to be doormats. That doesn't mean by being present in them, we have to be, we have to argue all the time, right? Just staying present commands empathy because you are a person, and that personhood is really hard for other people to deny. When these 12 pastors stayed in the room together, it was just by virtue of being there that something changed. And so I think sometimes we feel like we have to do something when we're in complicated relationships, and sometimes we just have to be. And that can be even harder because we don't feel satisfied after just being. You can't sort of check a box, but it makes a difference. And I think to your point about, you know, Islamophobia and being Muslim, right, you know, it's the same kind of thing. All of us carry differences that we bring into our lives, and by just being present, we ask someone else to acknowledge that. I was just in Montgomery, Alabama, and Brian Stevenson has done an extraordinary job creating these museums and monuments, and people are really afraid of going. They're afraid that if they go, they're going to be so undone that they might never be able to put themselves back together. That if they had to look at the horror of lynching or of slavery, of the history of enslavement in this country, they will be so undone they can't put themselves back together. The more we give other people the chance to say, oh, I can experience this difference and this piece of empathy and not be fully undone, right? I don't have to change. I can just be. The more courage we give all of ourselves to confront those bigger questions, right? We don't all have to jump in the deep end and say, okay, you know, I now need to go and spend a week in Montgomery. It's really hard. But they're smaller moments that we can cultivate for ourselves and for others by just being, that remind us that we have that power within us to persevere and to evolve in ways we may not expect, but in ways that we appreciate afterwards.
So we do have some time for audience questions. Just a little preface before we jump into the questions. Please make sure that your question ends with a question mark. So with that, there are a lot of questions. We'll try and get to what we can get to. Let's start right here with the glasses.
So thank you for speaking to engaging in empathy and standing in spaces that are difficult. I think one of the things I'm struggling with is how to show empathy or stand in those spaces when the other side actively makes me unsafe or has positions and views that put my life in danger as a lesbian and a woman in this country. So I think my question is like, when you're in that position of like a minority, like how do you bridge that divide or stand in that space when it could impact
I totally, I really appreciate the question, and I think it's really important. You know, with these 12 pastors, 8 of them believed that homosexuality was a sin, and I was a gay man coming in, married to a man with a daughter. You know, I know that feeling of like, what am I doing in this room? Am I, you know, all of these questions that go through our head. Am I platforming people whose views I disagree? You know, all of those complicated questions. I don't think there is a right answer. I think we are called to be brave where we can be, you know, and we all have things that are too sensitive where we need to protect ourselves, and we just can't do it. And I felt, you know, came out to my parents when I was 16. I felt like I can be in that room, and I'd never been injured by faith. I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, had an amazing, you know, Peter J. Gomes was my pastor. If any of you know who he is, like, legend. So I just never felt injured by it. So I'm like, I can be in this room. I can do that. I wouldn't say everyone should do that. But I know all of us, there are rooms where we could be braver and be in those spaces without sacrificing without feeling like the threat is too great or the pain is too intense. So I would say don't say I have to walk into every situation and let myself feel downtrodden. But I would ask yourself, is there a friendship where you could be more present, which is uncomfortable? But just by being in that friendship, it makes a difference. It doesn't mean you have to walk into, you know, my joke is always that there's this perception that doing this work means you have to have tea with Nazis, right? And that's not that's not the ask, right? The question is just, where is there difference in your life where you can be present? And how can you occupy that space with your dignity, with pride, and with grace and generosity? And sometimes that's just with your mom, you know. Sometimes we all have moms, and moms can be tricky. They're also very wise. And sometimes it's just like, can I occupy that space with a little more patience and love? So don't set a bar that's impossible. Sorry, that was too long of an answer.
Other questions? Let's go to the back. Yeah.
So in 1996, when Elijah took office in the 71st district, he recited a poem and kind of a speech. That poem goes like this: I have only just a minute, only 60 seconds in it. Forced upon me, can't refuse it. Didn't seek it, didn't choose it, but it's up to me to use it. I'ma suffer if I lose it, give a count if I abuse it. Just a tiny little minute, but eternity is in it. It's by Benjamin Mays. He's the president of Morehouse, known as the one who laid down the foundation for the civil rights movement. So my question is, how do you feel about that poem, and what can it speak to when you talk about time, and time to others that carry the same rigor that Elijah had into office?
I mean, it's a stunningly, I think it's like a heart-stoppingly beautiful poem, first of all, and I remember that. Second, I would say, I remember that because there's a video of that that's gone viral before, and I think second, I would say, almost to address your question, also, you would be shocked how much you can change in 60 seconds. I mean, truly. And I came into the work that I'm doing, honestly, as a cynic, and I am more gung-ho and inspired and confident in the project right now than I've ever been, because I've seen just like the result of actually putting people in the same room. We had an election party in 2024, dangerous thing to do. We like brought everybody together in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, key swing state, and put a bunch of people in the room who all had different politics on like the most important night of the year. And I remember really vividly a reader of mine who's a trans woman who I know has really strong, passionate, activist feelings about, you know, what she wants out of the world and out of politics in Pennsylvania. I remember seeing her talking to somebody who is another reader I have, who's like a diehard Trump supporter in a MAGA hat at my election party, and I know his views about trans issues. And I was like, oh my God, like my stomach turned, you know? And I just see them in the corner for 20 minutes. I'm doing TV hits, all this stuff. And then afterwards I went up and I asked both of them separately, like, how'd that go? What happened, you know? And it was just like, yeah, she's like pretty normal. I'm like, yeah. And then like I talked to her and she was like, he was kind of like way more open-minded than I thought, and like actually asked me questions, smart questions, and listened. And like 60 seconds, the beginning of that conversation, they have that interaction, and I think it probably changed both of them forever, honestly. So I would just like not underestimate how much importance you have as an individual and how little moments can sort of build something. I mean, it's cliche, but it doesn't take a lot of time to change the trajectory of really important things, in my experience.
All right, so unfortunately, we are out of time. Our panel has actually gone over, but I'm going to do something a little devilish right now and ask something, because I think it's actually really important, particularly going forward, and very much in the spirit of former Congressman Elijah Cummings, which is, I'm going to ask each of you, just very briefly, 20 seconds each, for one piece of practical advice for our audience as they go forward.
My habit when people come up to me and ask me questions about politics is that I always try and ask 3 questions before I share an opinion of my own. It's like my golden rule. Just because I'm a political journalist, everybody, what do you think about Trump's latest insane troop deployment or whatever? And just like, well, I don't know, where are you from? How'd you grow up? What do you think? What have you seen in the news about it? And just, I learned so much with just a few questions before I know what I think. It's the least interesting thing in the world to talk about your views. I know all of them. It's so boring. I'm interested in other people and where they're coming from. So I encourage you to try and do that in your day-to-day. I think it's a really powerful tool.
In the same vein, but slightly different, I think all of us can probably right now think of 3 people in our lives that we want to love better. Right? Like that we actually know we want to. Not people that are hard to love, people that we want to love better, and that we can make that choice. And, you talked about Ella Baker and love her. Martin didn't make the movement made Martin. And I think we are part of making a movement for something different. And that starts by building that fabric. So think of those 3 people, and if all of us do that, I don't know what will happen, but I know it will be better than today. So.
And on that note, we are done. Thank you all for your time. And go forth and engage and connect with your fellow humans. Thank you.
Thank you all. That is actually an excellent transition into our next session. If democracy is built on dialogue, it's sustained by empathy. To the point that was just made, you actually just have to care about other people to engage them in a meaningful way that is respectful. And so now we're going to have Leah Howard and her students from Pennsylvania. We've having a continued Pennsylvania moment happening here. Will help us explore what empathy looks like in practice, even amid the tensions of a campaign season. So please welcome Leah Howard, Autumn Cartwright, Cecilia Payne, and Noah Kocher.
Hello. Thank you so much. My name is Leah Howard, and I'm here from the University of Pennsylvania, so just up the road a little bit from Baltimore. So honored. I mean, we've been sitting here just being blessed left and right by all the wonderful things that people have shared, and there's so much resonance with our work, so I feel like I just want to join in a chorus. If you walked in and did not get one of our flyers, could you raise your hand? We have 2 lovely postdocs, Annie Chen and Erica Ko. They have their PhDs, but yet they pass out papers, and we're very grateful for their humility there. So anyway, I feel welcomed. We also are an SNF-funded organization. We're called SNF Padilla. So the SNF Padilla program, Padilla, in case you don't speak Greek, Padilla means educating the whole person. And so we're a program at Penn focused on educating the whole person, and I am super blessed and excited to share the stage with 3 of my students. The program that we are a part of is called Political Empathy Lab. We've heard the word empathy quite a lot, so I feel like we're in good company here. So again, my name is Leah Howard. I'm a political scientist. To my direct, I guess, left, your right, is Autumn Courtwright. She is a recent graduate. She was a classical studies and philosophy, political science, and economics major. Right next to her is Cecilia Pang. She's a third-year PhD student in American politics. And at the very end is Noah Kosher. He's a current Penn junior who's studying English. And we're going to talk a little bit about Political Empathy Lab. And because I didn't want to use our full time describing a map, on the back of your flyer, you'll see a map. And the map is of Pennsylvania. Again, not Maryland, Pennsylvania. I love Maryland, but we're in Pennsylvania. And the map basically describes what we did over the course of 2 different summers. If you can see it, we traveled around the state of Pennsylvania. All the things you see that are starred are the places that we stopped for at least 2 to 3 hours to meet with people. I call it somewhat the politics of encounter. What happens when you talk with strangers and encounter them. And so just keep that map handy. It'll come up as we're sharing stories. I want to keep my remarks very brief so that you can hear stories from my brilliant fellow people here on stage. I do want to say just one thing, though. If you see on the other side, so I directed you to the map, flip back to the other side, you'll see this thing that says Introduction and Theoretical Background. When we think of democracy, I often think about the importance of pluralism. And the quote there is actually from a religious studies scholar at Harvard whose name is Diana Eck. And she says there, and I'm going to read it because I think the words are really profound, but she says, pluralism takes the reality of difference as its starting point. The challenge of pluralism is not to obliterate or erase difference, nor to smooth out differences under a universalizing canopy, but rather to discover ways of living, connecting, relating, arguing, and disagreeing in a society of differences. And that's what Political Empathy Lab is trying to do. Be that, as Harry Hahn said earlier, that gym, that place where you learn how to do just that. And you'll see also those 3 B's, belief, belonging, and behavior. I tell my students that many times in the world in which we live, our beliefs mitigate and kind of organize our behavior, and then we kind of have, our belonging, and then we kind of have our behavior. What if we took behavior and swapped it with belief? So we thought so carefully about our behavior, so carefully about how we're listening and engaging people, used that to kind of sort our belonging, and then got to our beliefs. Not watering out our beliefs, not changing our beliefs, but leading with our behaviors. That's the experiment with Political Empathy Lab. What can we do? So we were charged, we got some money from the provost to do the travel. Thank you, Penn's provost. He's always listening, and so I think, no. And so because of that, we were able to do this. And what I told him I would produce back is a repertoire of skills of connection. And so we were really focused on connecting with place, as well as connecting with people, and then connecting with issues. So I'm going to turn the mic to my group of folks here to hear some stories.
Hi there, everyone. My name's Autumn, and I was a student on the first phase of the Political Empathy Lab, which ran last summer right before the 2024 election, all over Pennsylvania. You can see on that map the colored lines and stars. It was a 10-week trip where we traveled everywhere from Philly to all the way up to the other corner in Erie. And what we did was we would arrive at a place, often meet with thought leaders in the area, politicians, elected officials or former elected officials, nonprofit leaders, school board officials, business people, to hear a little bit about the area, sometimes before we had the chance to go out and talk to folks on the street, sometimes not. And then we would start walking around, observing what are people seeing, what are people hearing here, what are people doing, what are they up to, and then just go up to folks on the street, in cafes, in libraries, those public spaces, and start to have a conversation with them. So that's connecting with place first, then people, and we'll get into some of those strategies of connection in a little bit. but only then could we start connecting about issues. And I'll tell a story about the time that I was in Troy, which is this tiny little county way up in the top of Pennsylvania. And I'm walking around this fair with my conversation partner, Hanif. We're looking at what are people doing, what are they up to, and then we approach these two sheriff's deputies who are running this drone show thing. And we had a very long conversation with one of them, just asking questions. We're not there to listen for consensus. I'm not there to clap when someone agrees with me, but more so to just ask them and get an understanding of how their perspectives are informing their beliefs, especially in light of the 2024 election, but oftentimes folks don't necessarily have that very political angle. And they might just care about the issues. And one sheriff's deputy said all of these things. He walked away, he had to go do something else, and then his friend turned to us and said, you know, I disagree with just about everything that he said, but we never talk about that. And the fact that all of these opinions are right there under the surface is just so, it is honestly mind-blowing how people can go sometimes about their lives and not talk about that. Sometimes it's just for the peace of doing that, but yeah, we ran into a lot of folks who care very strongly about these issues, like these folks running a solar panel business, but they were scared away. Even when we introduced ourselves as the political empathy lab, they're scared away. They don't want to talk to us. And then once we start asking them, what do you really care about, and showing them that we're there to listen, then they actually might start even evaluating their own beliefs and sort of thinking through some of their thought processes right in front of us. So I'll turn it over to Noah for another story.
Yeah, so thank you, Autumn. I'm Noah. I was on the first phase of the trip as well, but then I joined Dr. Howard and 7 other undergraduates for just a week-long trip last summer. So not the summer before the 2024 election, but this past summer after the election. So this trip was only week-long. You'll see on the handout, phase 2 is, I think it's like 5 days or something like that. And it was a slightly larger group, and it was all undergrads. And so this was a little bit more focused on the gym aspect of building empathetic skills. So I'll start with a little bit that kind of framing of the student life. I don't know how undergraduate life is here at Hopkins or at other institutions that you all might be from, but at Penn, there's a really strong Penn bubble, is what we call it all the time. There's a particular street, 40th Street, where sort of like the expensive university development ends, and undergrads will say, don't go past 40th, don't go past 40th, you know, because it's, you know, that's not part of the university. That's not like our world. And that's wrong, and it's classist and racist and all these things. But that's the atmosphere, is there's this bubble. And so the phase 2 trip was kind of, you know, and I think the project as a whole is developed in breaking that bubble down, breaking down its construction. And so, yeah, so you're trying to move out of, you know, abstract politics and that sort of thing into real interaction with the people around us, the communities that we're a part of, and, you know, the world that we live in. And obviously, because we're in Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania in particular for us. So yeah, the shorter trip was a way of reproducing the methodology of empathy that Autumn was describing in a week, in, you know, a way that can get that practice for students of not shutting out other views, but inviting other perspectives in, and not retreating into our bubbles, but expanding our empathic concern for others beyond, you know, our class or our university towards the whole state or the whole nation or the whole community, the whole world. Yeah, and it was a really successful trip. We had a great time. And now I'm going to turn it over to Cecilia, who's going to talk a little bit about that same kind of student-centric part of this project in relation to the class that she worked on worked on with Dr. Howard.
There we go. Okay, hi, I'm Cecilia, and it's a privilege to be here. I had such an honor being Professor Howard's teaching assistant, And it's just so wonderful to hear Autumn and Noah's stories of their experiences. And really what this class, how I saw it, was really rooted in values of reimagination and co-creation, which is very much what we're here today to talk about, but how to connect like theory with practice. And so taking the skills that the students who went on both phases, how can we teach the students in the classroom that? And so the course is titled Political Empathy and Deliberative Democracy. And the students throughout the course, this previous spring semester, were trying to define what political empathy means and to rethink deliberative democracy. So deliberative democracy models often focus on speaking, but how might we move and shift away from thinking about the speaker and thinking about the listener? So how might we practice listening? And so this course was situated in the political science department, and so it was really broken down thematically in three core elements. So we had this top-down approach, a bottom-up approach, and also an inside-out approach. And so when we were thinking about political empathy, we were specifically thinking to how empathy might bridge political divides. And so we started with the top down, looking at federalism, sort of the history of the United States, thinking about affective polarization, so moving from the elite to the public level. And then from the bottom up, we were thinking a bit more situated in community subcultures. And so I'm going to just give a little appetizer because there's so many cool things going on in this course, but students were asked to role play, to represent different community subtypes across the United States. And we had a summit where people began to meet one another and practice those skills of listening and to share their stories, having situated themselves in a research project to understand a very particular sub-community of the United States. And then with the Inside Out, it was really looking at this relational component, which a lot of the panelists have mentioned today, which is not rather about like doing, checking off a checkbox, but how can we be? And so the Inside Out was very much drawing on neuroscience and psychological literature and helping students practice attunement. And so what does it mean to like take up space and also to create space within a very conversational context? And so it was a really beautiful experience because each time that Professor Howard teaches it, the students come up with different definitions of political empathy because it is so dynamic and really particular to how these students are building these skills and taking theory and going to it in practice. And so the other fun appetizer pieces that I'll give you from this course was Professor Howard had these ideas of conversation partners. So this was a consistent thing throughout the class where students were having conversations and also sharing how they were politically informed. So what makes them care about certain issues and writing, political autobiographies, but also being in conversation with conversation partners that would change over the course of the semester. And so it was really, really cool just to connect the theory, taking a lot of the literature from political science, psychology, and neuroscience, and then to really build on what Noah and Autumn and all the other students were practicing. We could get these students to practice those skills in the classroom too. Yeah, so now I'll pass it back to you all.
Yeah, so we're moving on to, I think it's the third or fourth section of this flyer. It says strategies of connection. So like Dr. Howard mentioned, that was kind of our output or goal. And I think it's, there's a little tagline there that we said, like, we're not canvassing, we're not polling, we're listening, we're practicing listening. And then the next thing it says, I don't have it with me, but something like skills for practicing empathy in our personal and political lives. So something that's really important to us, I think, is that we're not rediscovering or reinventing empathy. Like we all know how to connect with people. We know that really well. We have family, we have friends that we have really intimate and strong connections with. And so the thing that we're trying to address is how do we broaden those skills? Like how do we relearn those skills to apply them not just to those people that we have, deep connections with, my parents or whatever, not just those people, but also everyone else in the world, people who are different from us, people who aren't our allies, aren't our, people we agree with aren't in the same classrooms as us, but that we, are also people, are also humans, the same as we are. And so, I'll share a story that kind of from the first summer that really got that into my head. So the year before that trip, I'm a junior now, the year before that trip I was a freshman and I was making all new friends and like having to start a lot of conversations, as first years always have to do. And it was so hard and I felt like I couldn't do it. But eventually I started conversations, I made friends, I made connections. And then doing this trip, I was anxious because we were going to all of these places that, I'm from Pennsylvania, but I haven't spent time in every city in Pennsylvania. So I was going to places that I'd never been before, spending time that I'd never spent before, and having conversations I'd never had before. And that was really stressful. But then the more we did it, the more I realized that I'm just doing the same thing that I always do to make friends. And so we have a couple of those strategies there that Autumn will get to in a second. But one example is we were at that county fair, and I was talking to this woman. She was at the Republican kind of like messaging table, and we were standing there just chatting. And she asked me. We introduced ourselves. Me and the conversation partner I was with. We introduced ourselves, and he started talking with somebody else at the table. But then she and I were just kind of left to chat. And so she actually, before I asked her anything, asked me what I study and what I think about. I said, oh, I study English. And she said, what do you think about generative AI? And I was like, oh, I have all sorts of thoughts. And we just went back and forth in the same way that I would have making a friend at school or, talking to a family member. But this is a person who I had little to nothing in common with. And suddenly we really made a connection. And I think that, not only can that be applied to ideological difference like that, but also, racial divide and oppression and gender and, all sorts of other things, class. And I think that's the really important takeaway. So Autumn is going to get into some of those literal skills that we are trying to relearn.
Yeah. So say you leave this building, you're walking on the street, and you're so inspired by what we've just said here that you want to go up to someone yourself and try to have a politically empathetic conversation with them and work out your own empathy muscles. Theoretically, you should. But I remember my first time, my first 5 times, my first 10 times going up to people on the street. And it's still scary to approach someone, introduce yourself, and say, let's have a political conversation. Of course, you shouldn't do that. That's very scary. So instead, we have this little guide that we made through our inductive research process that allows us to have an empathetic conversation by starting with that behavior, creating the belonging, and then getting to the beliefs last. So we first start by establishing common ground. Okay, POV. You are my conversation partner. It's me and you. We're in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. We're walking around the street. It's a really hot day, so nobody's outside. But we see this little art studio that's open. So we walk inside. There's random things hanging from the ceiling. It's packed to the brim with knickknacks and things for sale. And we finally find a little woman at the back of the shop, almost hidden away by all of the art. So we talk about what we're seeing to establish common ground. Oh, I love this piece. Oh, did you make this? What are you guys up to here? Do you get a lot of customers? Asking these sorts of very easy, inoffensive questions always helps to complement what you're seeing on the street, always helps to, talk about the weather or sports as long as you know the local sports team. And then you can ease into the conversation. We always focus on humility. So I would introduce myself by saying, hello, I am a student from the University of Pennsylvania. Sometimes, depending on where we were, I wouldn't say the University of Pennsylvania because that could be contentious, especially in Philadelphia, it turns out. And I am just here to listen. Sometimes I'd say I'm from the Political Empathy Lab, but even the very word political would often make folks retreat. And then once you start talking about those very, very basic, questions like, oh yeah, where did you grow up? Where did you go to high school? What do you do for work? What do you like to do for fun around here? Have any kids? All these sorts of things, pick and choose. Then you can get to the heavy hitting stuff. but the whole time showing signs of active listening. Again, not just when they say something that you agree with, because that wasn't the point of why we're there. The point of why we're there is to listen. So, nodding your head, making eye contact, all of these things that some of us maybe forgot how to do over COVID, or if you're my age, maybe you never really had a good chance to learn until Dr. Howard came along and gave me the perfect opportunity. So I actually still do this all the time. I live in DC now. I just graduated, and I see a lot of National Guard around. I don't know, you may or may not be aware, the National Guard is in DC, and what they do a lot of is standing around doing nothing, as far as I could tell. So I was very curious about their experience, and I found myself wondering often whenever I would see them on the metro, what are they thinking about? What are their thoughts on being here? And then I realized I can just go ask them. So I relied on these strategies to go up to them and ease into that conversation, because it can be scary. Some of them carry really big guns, and they walk around with faces that look like this. And, it's not always the most inviting thing, but like all of us, they want to be listened to, and they're very bored, probably more so than the rest of us, most days. And I just find that I use this strategy all the time, and it's free, it's fantastic, it's wonderful, it's a great way to learn about the world that is directly in front of you. So I have Dr. Howard to thank for this skill.
Well, thank you again for listening to us. I feel like we talk about listening and then we've been talking a lot, but we are at time. Just one last sentence to say is that we have a little gift for you all that we'll pass. It's just a sticker. It's a sticker of Pennsylvania, and with this sticker, maybe we'll have them at the door. It's a commitment and a challenge when you take the sticker that you'll talk to someone in the grocery store, that you'll build a little microcosm of trust with someone who's different than you, and build social trust one conversation at a time. Thank you very much.
We really want to thank the students from the University of Pennsylvania to give us some ideas about how to be more empathetic and how we engage people we disagree with. We're just going to take a minute as we're setting up a bit for our next session, which will involve even more students giving us a way to look forward in terms of how we process this moment. So let's talk about making space for possibility. What does democracy look like when designed by the generation who will inherit it? And this is such an important piece of this entire conversation because what we're creating is the next generation of citizens, the next generation of voters, the next generation of people who will not only shape the democracy in which we live, but this democracy and how it interacts with other people across the globe. So we want to welcome up Maya Rockamore Cummings, Scott Warren, and high school student design lab winners who will be able to introduce themselves. Please speak into the mic as closely as possible so that people on the live stream can hear you. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Warren. I'm a fellow with the SNF Agora Institute here at Johns Hopkins. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to hear from Maya and the students. So I'll be brief here. But prior to coming to Hopkins, why hopefully I'm a little relevant for this discussion despite my age, is I founded and led a youth civics education organization called Generation Citizen, which was all about how do we get civics education back into the classroom and how do we make it action-oriented, engaging, and relevant. And I think oftentimes in these types of conversations or these types of settings, we hear about how young people are the future and we need to educate them about how government works and we need to make sure that they're inheriting whatever democracy we leave behind. But I think that leaves out the fact that every time that we see positive change and progress in this country and around the world, young people are at the forefront of that change. And that's something that we tried to push forward Generation Citizen by taking civics education from something that was a potentially staid concept of here's how government works to a concept that young people experienced in their own lives by taking action on issues that they cared about. And I think that that's something that we're gonna hear from today is young people reinventing what democracy looks like for them. And I'll just say a few words too. I think that this moment in time right now, so often, and I don't understand young people as much as I used to because I'm a little older, so I love teaching to get the opportunity to do so. But I think there's always this sense of sometimes older generations can have more paternalistic attitude towards young people, and you have to wait your turn and you have to learn along the way. And this generation of young people specifically, we see this in research we've done at Agora, and we're seeing this around the world, is really demonstrating in practice that they're not putting up with the status quo. I had the opportunity and privilege to be in Kenya, a country I've spent a lot of time in, about a year and a half ago. I was there for a conference with an organization called Democracy Moves, which we helped incubate at Agora, which brings together young people from around the world that are pushing for democratic change. Happened to be there on a day that tens of thousands of young people took to the streets because they were frustrated with a tax bill that their government had put forth that they thought would curb their standard of living because they were so frustrated with how politics had run in their country, and they're still active in that country. We've seen this in the last few weeks in Nepal, where young people have taken to the streets and completely changed the trajectory of their country. We're seeing it in places like Madagascar. What's happening and what we've seen in research at Agora is that young people, and I think this is really interesting, we just saw in a poll that young people are saying they are a little frustrated and cynical with the way that things are going. They're also more likely, much more likely than older generations in this country to be willing to engage across difference. Which is sort of a fascinating thing to think about, that they're more cynical about the way that things are going, but they're more likely to engage across difference. And I think that shows me like, we're just gonna do things differently than everybody else has. And I think that that's what I'm excited to hear about from you all today, is how you all are thinking about doing things differently, and seeing young people not just as inheritors, but inventing the future that we so desperately need right now. So honored to turn it over to Dr. Maya Rockemore Cummings, and she's gonna talk a little bit about the 2025 Democracy Design Lab.
So this room is incredibly diverse, but just think about it. It wasn't that long ago that a room that looked like this would be illegal in the United States of America. There was a time in this country where we deliberately, through our policies and our practices, where we deliberately designed spaces to keep people apart. And if we're not careful, we're heading back that way. And so I actually married a man from Baltimore. His name was Elijah Cummings, and he always told a lot of stories. And so I learned a lot about what it was like for him to grow up in Baltimore. And one of his most formative stories was actually being in a segregated schoolhouse in South Baltimore, where they actually, didn't have much in terms of the facility. But in order to do their plays, they actually had to go to a nearby white school for the white kids. And when they went to the school, he remembered looking around at the beautiful facility and how great everything was. And he particularly remembered the bathroom, because the bathroom was this beautiful blue color that he was just like in awe of. And he was just like, oh, wow. If we had access to this all the time, life would be wonderful. And the reality is that when we design spaces to keep people apart, I think that we forget the impact that it has on people's psyche, on their belief, their self-belief, and their notion of belonging in the society. So he grew up with the scar of having his early life defined by being different and being outcast as an African American boy in the United States of America in the city of Baltimore. And it was at the age of 11 where he became literally a part of the civil rights movement right here in Baltimore City. A woman named Juanita Jackson Mitchell came to the small little segregated pool that they actually had in the summertime in South Baltimore. And Elijah always told this story about how this pool is so small and there were so many kids that they actually had to take turns getting in the pool. And the water was hot and dirty, he said. But Juanita Jackson Mitchell showed up one day and she said, "How would you all like to swim in a large, big, cool pool?" And the kids were like, and Elijah remembers being like, "Yeah, because we would love to have a bigger pool." And what they didn't know is that Juanita Jackson Mitchell was the first African American woman in the state of Maryland to actually have a law degree. She was the first black woman, female lawyer in the state of Maryland. And she also ran the youth program for the local NAACP branch. And so she led Elijah and these other kids, and Elijah was only 11 years old, on an integration march. They marched from their little segregated pool to the Riverside Pool in South Baltimore. But along the way, the kids were actually stoned. Rocks were thrown at them by, adults who did not want to see them integrate this pool, And so that was his formative experience, after several days of actually moving down this street to integrate the pool. The police were out there trying to protect the kids, but they didn't actually stop the rocks from being thrown. Elijah had a rock thrown in his face and blood spurting out of his forehead. It was a scar he carried for his entire life. And so with that, that was how he actually, at the age of 11, became involved in politics. And he looked at the woman who led them and he said, "Who is she and what does she do? Because whatever she is, I want to be." And he found out she was a lawyer and he made it his point to become a lawyer. So with that, anybody that knew Elijah, and a lot of you here did, you know that he always said, "Our children are the living messages we send to a future we will never see." And he made it his priority to go visit schools, to go visit, to attend graduations, whether that be kindergarten, middle school, high school, or college. He made it his priority to make sure that those young people knew that they mattered, because he knew what it felt like not to matter or to feel like society didn't think that he mattered. And so, 5 years ago, I created this forum, the Democracy and Freedom Festival, because I saw it happen on January 6th of 2021. And I said, we don't appreciate our democracy here. We've got to do something to celebrate it and understand what freedoms it has. Because you can be an 11-year-old black boy from South Baltimore and participate in the integration march. And within the period of 10 years, the entire laws of the country can change because you took action and decided to challenge the way things work. We understand that democracy is not something you experience in a classroom or just in a textbook. Democracy is to be practiced. And that was what Elijah lived. And so this year, on the 5th anniversary of the Democracy and Freedom Festival, I, as a project of the SNF Agora Institute, I was a fellow this last year, decided to create a new aspect of it, going into the schools and actually asking young people to design their version of democracy. And so this year we actually created the Democracy Design Lab as a component of this festival. And so we recruited several area schools, And I don't know if they are all here, but it included certainly Patterson High School. It included Baltimore City College. It also included, what was the one other school? ACE, the Academy for Career and College Exploration. And we had those students go through a day-long working in partnership with Dent Education. Mickey and his colleagues at Dent Education who do design thinking. We had an entire day where they went through the paces of understanding the principles of design thinking, understanding, how to pursue inquiry, understanding, how the tools that you can use in order to build prototypes and new ways of thinking about, approaches to challenges and problems that they see, and exploring the problems themselves. What are their priorities, their policy priorities, their community priorities. And we asked them to actually pick an issue or pick a solution and design it in a way that can change. And the question was, how might we boldly reimagine a democracy that can better serve our generation, our community, our state, and our nation? And the winners, I am proud to say, are here today. The winners are from Cristo Rey Jesuit High School. And I would like to invite them up to give their winning presentations.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ava White, and I'm a senior at Cristo Rey Jesuit High School.
My name is Nyla Scotland, and I'm a senior at Cristo Rey Jesuit High School.
My name is Kylie, and I'm a senior at Cristo Rey Jesuit High School.
My name is Layla Robinson, and I'm a senior at Cristo Rey Jesuit High School.
All right, so I have a question. Raise your hand if you've ever been on the bus before. Raise your hand if you've ever had a bus drive past you. You miss a bus. The bus never came. All right.
Yep.
So our question was, how might we improve public transportation for impoverished communities in Baltimore City so that it's reliable and accessible?
So we're going to share some personal stories. And my personal story was one time I was on the way to school. I woke up at 7 o'clock. I stood on the bus stop for at least 30 minutes waiting for a bus, and no bus ever came. And I didn't have a ride to school. So by the time I had gotten to school, I had got in-school suspension for being late to school for something I couldn't control.
My personal story is that I had to get to an internship downtown, and I woke up in the morning. I had to be at this internship by 9:30, so I woke up about like 7:06, and I waited at the bus stop in the rain, and no bus came. I went back inside. It said another bus was going to come. I went outside, nothing came, and I was in the rain for about like 40 minutes waiting for a bus.
Okay, my personal story happened probably about a week ago. And I was downtown. I think I was on like West Pratt Street, and I was waiting for the Brown. And 2 Brown buses came, and they both rode by me. So I had to take 2 other buses and then walk 17 minutes from my house in the dark.
My personal story is I was waiting for the bus stop to get to work one day. I woke up really early, and the bus rode past me, and I got to work really late. And that affects me in our daily life. And I think we all have personal stories of just the bus not being reliable.
So a statistic here is that a typical Baltimorean can only get to 8% of the region's jobs in under an hour in public transportation. If we can reach 4 out of 4 jobs by car, a standard of just reaching 1 out of 4 jobs by transit should be achievable. A 2023 study for Central Maryland transportation shows that Baltimore region earns a D+ for reliable transportation.
So Baltimore transportation, it's for most people or like students our age, it's our only way to get to school. A lot of people, this is their only form of transportation. Imagine being disabled and you're not able to get to work, or you have to go to the hospital and you can't get there. It's just really important, and I just think that we should just make sure that it's reliable for everybody.
So we had some ideas on how to fix it, and here's like a map of just of the routes like in Baltimore City, and we came up with a plan. First, we wanted to extend some lines. So in areas like Brooklyn and Cherry Hill or along Bel Air Road, like in more impoverished communities, to extend these bus routes, since a lot of people in impoverished communities rely on public transportation to get where they need to go. And we also thought that since like even the like kind of logistics of being on the bus, like sometimes the bell to pull a stop doesn't work. Sometimes ramps for disabled people to get on, they don't work. There are supposed to be screens that display every stop, or like there's an audio system that tells you to stop for either people who are impaired of hearing or blind. Like those are things to make the bus more accessible for them. And a lot of times they just don't work. So we also proposed an idea to kind of get those things fixed up, because there's a lot of money being poured into things like highways around the city instead of into our public transportation.
Yes, and our two maps here, the first one is just a regular MTA bus line map. And I have up here which communities are lacking bus routes. And there are communities like Brooklyn and Curtis Bay and Cherry Hill that are all lacking in bus routes. And this one down here is the Baltimore Red Line, which is supposed to be a high frequency bus route that would go from Woodlawn all the way down to John Hopkins. And it was supposed to be like shot in 2023, but it was pushed aside and brought back by Governor Wes Moore. And that would really, it would help a lot of people from Woodlawn down here. It would be accessible to help people get to school on time, to work on time, get to where they need to be on time.
We also need to make sure that bus stops are safer. I mean, in the weather, like in the winter, you're standing on a bus stop, there's no shelter. It's just terrible. You might get sick. Like, we need to make sure that this is like reliable and accessible for everybody. It's a huge issue.
And things that we can do, like we can invest in our city, we can speak up, we can write to the Baltimore Banner every single time we have a run-in with the bus, so that these stories are out there. A lot of people think, oh, well, I don't take the bus, so it doesn't really affect me. But it affects so many communities of people that rely on that as their only form of transportation. Like, more bus needs to be accessible for everybody.
I agree. It's not just about us being high school students. It's about people trying to get to work, or people who need to go to the grocery store. I take the bus, and I see a lot of people even just taking the bus to get to the grocery store. Like, just simple things like that, where it's so inaccessible and it's just not okay. Like, because a lot of, in these impoverished communities, it's their only form of transportation. So imagine you have no car and you're just stuck with a lousy bus.
Yes. I think a lot of us, like, I started taking the bus towards the end of my freshman year to get home from school, but ever since doing that, I've started using the bus to get everywhere now, because I don't drive. So if we want to hang out, we're all texting each other, okay, what bus are you getting on? We're all using the bus now. So it's not even just getting to school, it's not just getting to work, it's getting anywhere for anyone that doesn't have a way to get there, like a vehicle.
And a lot of people are unaware of how bad it is. Like what Nala said, people just say, oh, you can take the bus, like, oh, it's not that deep, especially like adults like telling children, oh, just take the bus, like, just take the bus. But it's really not that simple, because it's you waiting for the bus. It's, if the bus is packed, it's gonna ride past you and you have to wait for another bus. It's just things like that that are not okay.
And if there were more bus routes in these areas, so much more job opportunities for these people living there. And like, if you had a job interview and you can't rely on a bus to get there, how are you even going to get that opportunity? So much more opportunities are going to be open for these people in these communities.
Yes, and a huge issue here, I would like to say, is that so oh shit.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. I think we learned a lot at our democracy lab. We learned about dent mindsets and taking small steps, because getting here on that lab day, we had a lot of different ideas that we had to scrap at first before we actually settled on this. And it seemed like all the other groups were moving so fast, and we were a little nervous that we were falling behind, but we got to it in the end, and I think we did a really good job. Yes.
Mickey to come up and help me to present the awards to the students. Mickey.
Okay, well, let's give them one more round of applause. That was amazing. So there's been a special person who, you know, it wasn't just the students that were there. We really had some great staff members involved in making this day happen. And so would y'all like to honor your teacher?
So Miss Tamara, she really helped us a lot, like during our presentation. Like she was so helpful throughout it. She was just like giving us tips on, don't worry, you're gonna figure this out. When we were going through the process of like trying to figure out what it is that we wanted to focus on, she was just amazing. She just was so like support. She drove an hour to get here from her home to come support us. She was there through every step of the way, even on the way here or like before when we were preparing to come here. She was just so supportive, telling us that we got this, and we just really appreciate her.
And we actually have one for each of you. So y'all did an incredible job today and throughout. So Kylie, I want to give you yours here. Let's give Kylie a big shout out. We've got Nyla here with this amazing work. And then finally Layla as well. And maybe Miss Tamara, let's get you coming back up. And you should join. Yeah, join again. Yeah. And can we also just give one more big round of applause? I know Maya talked about this amazing vision for the Democracy Design Lab, and also big gratitude to the Agora Institute as well. Incredible experience.
We're not on now? There we are. Awesome. Great. So now we're going to close out our formal program. We're going to move from dialogue into music. We're going to have Richard Johnson. He's going to come to remind us that democracy, like jazz, it's an act of improvisation, listening, and collective creation.
How's everybody doing? You good? All right, awesome. You can hear me? Okay, yes, you can hear me, and there we are. Great. I am Richard Johnson. I'm the Associate Jazz Piano Professor at the Institute of Peabody Conservatory. Along with that, yes, give it up. That's right, music. Thank you. I'm also one of the Provost Fellow winners for 2025, and I was very fortunate enough to be asked to close the ceremonies for today. So a couple things I'd like to talk about since I know you guys are anxious to get to the reception. I am a jazz musician, but as well as playing jazz, I've traveled to 91 countries. I've had the chance I was invited to South America with former President Bill Clinton. I got to spend a significant amount of time with him. I also had a chance to have dinner with Michelle Obama. And my mentor is Herbie Hancock. Yes, give it up for Herbie. All three of these people I spent significant amount of time with. And one of the common threads that would always come up is democracy. Now imagine you're a 21-year-old and you're invited to go to South America by Herbie Hancock. Talk about being shocked. I didn't know what to say, but yes. So I'm with him on a tour bus. I'm asking him about playing with Miles Davis. How was it being a child prodigy? And he's answering everything. He's an amazing, amazing person. But I started to notice in this conversation, everything kind of revolved back around being a great human being and how do you help those who need help. So for me, that really stuck with me as a person who was 21 working on his master's. And even though I was trying to play jazz, after leaving that conversation, I said to myself, well, what am I doing? I'm playing piano. Am I actually helping people? What can I do along with playing music that's going to help our society and our country? So, same tour, it's Democratic Presidential Summit. I get to meet President Bill Clinton. So I'm talking to Bill Clinton. And of course, he's asking me about jazz and Thelonious Monk, famous piano player. And he says, I used to play saxophone. I'm like, yeah, right. All right. And we start to talk about democracy. Same tour. So I'm like, okay, there's a thread going on here. And he's like, what can you do to help the next person? Fast forward, about 10 years ago, I was the ambassador for music in Qatar. I lived there for 4 years in Doha. I was in charge of music at the St. Regis Hotel for Jazz at Lincoln Center and representing different clubs and diplomacy in the country. So I would always think about some of these things I learned on my travels. I did 6 State Department tours for the government, dealing with different presidents, kings, queens, and they would always ask very specific questions about democracy. So I said, you know what, maybe I better read up a little bit more on what democracy is, because everybody's asking me, and I'm just trying to play the piano. So during my time in Doha, due to certain circumstances, the First Lady, Michelle Obama's flight was delayed due to a sandstorm. She loves jazz. She finds out there's a jazz club there. Her whole plane, which had 65 people on it, she sends to the jazz club. She says, I want to have dinner with him. So I'm having dinner with her. We're talking about exercise. We're talking about fitness. We're talking about food. We're talking about jazz. And then we end up talking about democracy. So I bring these 3 different people up because we are talking about improvisation, jazz, and democracy. And what do they have in common? They actually have lots of things in common. A few of those things are you have to play in harmony. And today, I'm not standing here by myself. I brought along some of my students from the conservatory. We have the pleasure of being led by Sean Jones, one of the most famous jazz trumpet players on earth. And if you don't believe me, Google him. He's the chair of the jazz department. So instead of having class today, I invited some of these students here to participate in the reception and play. But in one of those foundational elements of democracy in jazz, we have harmony. We have to figure out how to get along. And today we have Lucas Vodapic back there. Could you play us, give it up for Lucas right there. Could you play us just a basic chord progression in harmony? All right, so this is a standard harmonic progression we hear all over the world, but was really made famous via jazz in the United States. So why do I use that as an example? It's because it sounds good. Pretty basic, but in order to get to that, we have to do some research. We have to do some homework. We actually have to make sure all the different parts are working together. And that involves elements like listening. It involves patience. It involves trust. These are elements that are also part of a great democracy, right? So we have to make sure they work together. And even when they don't, sometimes, you know, things get messy, right? In jazz and democracy, we still have to work it out, figure it out. There's some other foundational elements as well. You know, a lot of people like to talk about music in reference to having great melodies. Yes, we have harmony, But the melody is really important. Imagine going to hear someone give a speech and it is just long and boring, right? That's like a song with a horrible melody. To give us an example of a great melody, we have Mr. Netto back here on his clarinet. All right. Oh, yeah, give it up. Anybody here know that song? Recognize it? Right, exactly. So that's a very pleasurable, you noticed it, you know it, right? So everybody likes that melody. Like democracy, when you hear a great speech, somebody says something you're like, yeah! All right. Right, so that's another foundational principle that's important to improvisation jazz and democracy. We have to make sure that with democracy, they work together, the melody with the harmony. And then we got to make sure that it feels good, right? If no one remembers what you play, if they walk away feeling good, they may say, I think I'll buy another ticket. Or I may donate X amount of dollars to your foundation. And yes, it does work like that. To give us an example of that, with the rhythm, we have Ryan back there. Hit it. How many people have heard that before? Right. Foundational elements of our government sounds marching bands, right? So if we've got good harmony, we've got a great melody, great rhythm, and it's feeling good. Now people are like, yeah, okay, I'm ready to party. Along with that, we have some foundational pillars that really root the music into what we need to have to listen, right? To play, for support, right? When things go wrong, we can fall back on those foundational principles, laws, elements. We have the same thing in jazz, especially with improvisation. And that's going to be shown to us by Kai on the acoustic bass. All righty. So now we have the roots, we have the harmony, we have the melody, we also have the groove, but if everyone's not smiling, we may be in trouble, right? And that's where the fun comes in. Imagine going to hear a great speech and you love it, but the person was very boring and spoke very monotone. You probably wouldn't remember too much. But in jazz, we like to have fun, right? Everybody likes to have fun, right? People want to snap their fingers. They want to clap along. They want to have a good time. And that's where Evan comes in. He's going to give us a short demonstration on the trombone, what the smile and the fun sounds like. Oh, I like that. Yes. Thank you. That was bluesy and it made us smile. All right, so we have some elements that are in common. It's very important to realize in our country, in our music, right, and what we believe, that we have to figure out how we're going to get along, how we're going to make it work. And even if we don't completely agree, we all have to come to some type of consensus. Fortunately, we have great musicians here at this university. We also have wonderful staff, great administration, right? I've had the pleasure to have several dinners with our provost. He's a good friend of mine, and I've learned a lot from him. And one of the things I've learned is sometimes it's better to listen than to speak. So as I'm teaching my classes, my Jazz Improvisational 1 class, which everyone here is invited to, you will find it very interesting. The students will tell you, I am not too difficult, but I do try to prepare them for a real world with disagreement. Right? And we learn about that through music and improvisation. But you all really are invited. Mondays, Wednesdays, 4:30. I'll look for you. Come on out. But with these elements, we talk about them in class, in real time, outside of class. All the students are my friends. Some are from Chicago. I've had Luca since 9th grade. Kai, she's been to my jazz camp in Chicago. Ryan, he's actually taught there as well. So it's past just an educational environment. It's actually personal so that we can actually really make it work. So as I bring this to a close, what would I have you remember? First of all, sometimes we don't agree. But with that, we can learn from the disagreements, right? That's a democratic idea. Second of all, making sure that our point is made, but at the same time, we're listening to the other point and we're having patience, right? These things are very important. Third, I always tell my students, smile. Even if you disagree, smile. A smile goes a very long way in our society, right? Have fun. Those three elements are extremely important in life, in music, and in a democratic society. So right now I'm going to hand it over to Mary, and I appreciate your time. And remember, smile.
Thank you, Richard, and to Jenna Story, if you're here, who collaborated on that last session, and the students, and there's more music to come, and I am smiling. I see a lot of smiles in the room. I'm Mary Bruce, Assistant Director at SNF Agora, heading up our public programs. Thank you. I recognize I am the last thing between closing our time here in the auditorium and hearing more music and eating more delicious food, so I will be quick. 3 things, because I was told you should share things in 3s. Gratitude, intention, and celebration. So starting with gratitude, I want to say thank you. And Johns Hopkins is a STEM school, and the science says gratitude, a regular gratitude practice, is linked to happiness. And I know in the work of keeping democracy healthy and strong can be hard. And so having a gratitude practice linked to happiness helps me and others step back into the work each day. So I want to invite everyone here just to take a moment. Gratitude can get cut easily from your day. So I just want to invite everybody to take a moment and think through today. What are some things you have to be grateful for? I have a few. First, our tremendous gratitude to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, who established the Stavros Niarchos Foundation SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins in 2017. And I am so grateful to get to be a part of this community and have days like today. To the team at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, many of whom are here today, you continue to motivate us and work harder every day to create spaces for civic discourse and public convenings like these, engage our community. Thank you. To our events partners, including the SNF Parkway Theater, they hosted our film screening last night. A lot of you were there. It's a beautiful space, and we look forward to partnering with them. To our incredible staff, the SNF Agora Institute, Young Song, our events planner, who should have endless thanks. Yeah, a round of applause for Young Song. The team from the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences, the Peabody Institute, our events partners, Experiences on Demand, the incredible Trisha, Union 3 Events, the catering team of the Mirror Kitchen Collective with the beautiful menu and the work they do in the community, and so many others, the AV team, everybody, the janitorial, everybody who came together and created an Agora today, including the 28 presenters we had today. And the communities and knowledge and experiences they brought to the room, including our incredible MC, Eugene Scott, who kept us on time. Amazing. We are grateful for your wisdom and your time, and all of this was a commercial. SNF Agora does lots of events, and we want to keep creating and co-creating them with you. I can't wait to have like a whole evening of jazz music in the future, including tonight. And Maya Rockamore Cummings, where are you? Thank you. I'm almost done, but these are important. Maya for your vision and passion and incredible hard work and like Google organizational skills. I have learned so much from you since I'm not a Baltimore native, moved here recently, have learned so much from you and Elijah's legacy, and it's humbling. And with that, and because of that, we're moving to the second thing, which is intention. I read a quote from Elijah that I'm going to try and find here, where he asked, "When we dance with the angels, what will we say about what we did to keep democracy healthy?" I think I paraphrased that, but I see some folks remembering. When we're dancing with the angels, how will we answer the question, what did we do to keep our democracy intact? He said that. So I want to invite each of you to think about that right now. Like, what do we do today? What do we learn together? What do we say? And how might we show up tonight and tomorrow to keep doing this work? Thank you, Elijah. Gratitude, intention, and celebration. And I will turn it back to Richard, because celebration, the work of democracy is hard, and we have to balance the labor with joy. So we're going to do that, and we're going to do it with Richard leading the way.
Thank you very much. So what we're going to do right now, I know everyone wants to get to the reception, but we're going to dance our way into the reception. So I'm going to hand it over to our students. We're going to do a little second line around the auditorium. You guys can follow them right into the reception room, and we can have a joyous, memorable, democratic time. Thank you.